we did a podcast due to all kinds of personal work and issues we had, but we're here back once again with our podcast. And because our latest podcasts was a very interesting one, and we were still stuck with a lot of questions, we have asked our guest if he was willing to have a second podcast with us. So, welcome back, Armin. And once again, thank you for your precious time and that you're making time to answer questions that we have and to share the knowledge that you have. So, thank you once again.
Okay, well, I've no reason to thank me. I'm glad to be back and answer any questions you have. It's obviously always better to share information than to leave people in confusion and unanswered questions. That doesn't help anyone. So,
So yeah, we are really looking forward to just having a talk about dog training, of course,
hmm hmm
because that's what it's all about for
correct.
all
Yeah.
three of us, I guess.
hmm
But all three of us have our different views on training dogs and also our different experiences. So
hmm
one of the things you left me with the last time we talked was we did talk a little bit about the difference between people that just do a lot of training and people that
hmm
do operational work and
hmm
how they train for that. So, um, what I mean by people that just do a lot of training is usually we see that people are then very methodological, if you
hmm
know what I mean by what I
hmm
what I mean by that,
correct. Yeah.
and taking certain steps to get to a certain goal,
hmm
and setting really strict criteria for them,
hmm
and then working towards that goal. Am I saying that correctly? Are you following what I'm
Yeah, I
trying to
think
say?
I think you do. Now I'm gonna jump in here and immediately say that the goal that you do when we're doing training only
Yeah,
is typically a picture,
yeah,
and a picture is not the same as a function.
no,
You can evaluate the picture by watching it, by looking at it, by videotaping it,
yeah,
but the only way that you can actually determine whether what you did in your training is functionally working is by applying it in the situations that aren't staged, that aren't predictable, and that are real world and real life. And
yeah,
that can only happen in an operational setting. Now,
yeah,
having said that, and again, that was one of the things in the questions that you sent me. That doesn't mean that we need to train crazy scenarios all the time, because that doesn't work
no,
either, because it's still
no,
only a picture that we're showing the dog. I
hmm,
think people need to understand the functional skills that the dogs need to have in order to do the job that we go out to do. Now, if that job is doing a KMPV trial, it's obviously very easy because we know it's written down and there's
yeah,
parameters and criteria, and lots of people have done it, so you can get lots of input.
yeah,
The real world situations are much more different because they never happen exactly the way we expect them to.
no,
You always have sort of other factors. The suspects and the subjects are never decoys, which means they don't ever move or act or do things in a certain way. When say we do detection, we don't know if anything is hidden.
no,
When we do training, we know there's either something hidden or there isn't. You may have a few blank rooms or a few blank cars, but you also know there's something to be found. And what you're looking for, there's fewer distractions. If role players act like unruly vehicle occupants at a narcotic vehicle stop, they're acting. It's not the same. Nobody's concerned for their safety. If
no,
you pull over people that are carrying drugs in their vehicle, and a handler and a dog are supposed to search that, the occupants are, if narcotics are in the vehicle, they're criminals. They don't want to go to jail. How far are they willing to go to evade jail or prison, right?
yeah,
Are they going to become violent? Do they try to run away? Do they
mm-hmm.
try to just act very belligerent and rude to distract the dog, to distract the officer, to keep the officer's mind off his job? We can try to reenact that, but everybody there
Mm-hmm.
knows it's not real. And it changes things a lot.
Yeah,
And then we still don't know if there's anything in the car. Now we can set all this stuff up, we hide the drugs, And we know that, yes, keep looking, dog, until you find it. We know it's there. You just need to block all those distractions out. That doesn't happen in the real world, and we can't really duplicate that. Now, say we're doing detection and we're looking for a bomb. Well, looking for a real live bomb is different than explosives that are hidden by a trainer that you know will not kill you or your dog, right? So it becomes a very different feel for the dog, for the handler. The entire scene is different. And if that has not been tested, if that has not been done over and over, and to see, okay, in training the dog did this, in a real utilization, deployment, operational setting, whatever you want to say, the dog performed differently. And then you adjust the training until the dog performs reliable. Sometimes it takes the dogs a little bit of getting used to things in the real world, and sometimes it doesn't, because the training is very set for that. And again, when it comes to apprehension, when it comes to real gunfights, when it comes to all that kind of stuff, staging it and scripting it is one thing. Doing it for real is an entirely different thing. And I'm not talking about somebody. I've handled a dog and I've had my dog bite people. I have never been in a gunfight, right? I have looked for real bombs. I have looked for narcotics. I've done all that stuff. But I've never been in a war zone. I've never been in a dark building at night with a murder suspect who is armed and looking for him. I have not done that. But I work with people that do it every day. And I train their dogs. And I get the feedback from almost every deployment telling me how their dogs performed. And knowing the dogs from when they were green, when they were still sport dogs or pets or whatever they were when we bought them, how they developed in school. When we make our assessment, the dog is now ready to do this real world, and we test them a little bit as much as we can in a training setting. And then the dogs have to go out the door. And a lot of times that's when sort of the rubber meets the road. The dogs will either perform or they will not perform. And I hear in jurisdictions, there's some jurisdictions, especially in the South of the United States, where they have like a very high incident environment and a very high sort of a target-rich environment, which means they have lots of opportunities to bite people. And you hear stories that the dogs take 2, 3, 4 bites until they seriously break skin and start causing injury. Now they're apprehending, they're grabbing, they're frightening the people, but they leave red marks or a scratch with their teeth or a bruise or something like that. When we know that the same dog, if he bites you in a bite suit, he leaves tremendous bruises on you that hurt for a week. So why is that same dog, when he's biting through a sweatshirt, only leaving bare marks on him? Why is he not puncturing, ripping flesh like we know dogs can do, because we see those as well, right? And for me, it's always like this. I have some departments that don't get so many bites. The dogs will never get 4 or 5 bites to get used to biting a person for real. If those dogs meet a very violent individual the first time they encounter him, and they do those weak ass bites, somebody's going to get hurt. It could be the dog, because the dog is always the first one there. It could be the handler or the first officer that comes in behind the dog, but somebody's going to get hurt, because unless the person is really frightened just of the presence of the dog is not creating enough pain compliance, and the dog is not creating enough, say, injury, because an injury debilitates you and limits and reduces your ability to fight back. And if a dog doesn't do that, he's not doing everything he can to keep himself and his team safe. And I don't think we, as trainers, should need those 3 or 4 warm-up bites to get a dog to bite for real. And the fact that lots of people still do shows that there's gaps in training that are overlooked, that are not understood, that people just are I think there's a disconnect between what the human perceives when he looks at a dog and what really happens emotionally when it's done for real. And I'm not claiming that I have all the answers, but I have a very, very high percentage of reliability when it comes to the job. And part of it is because I get to see so many dogs before they were really functionally effective.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I say, okay, the dog is getting ready, now I think he will do the job that we're setting him out to do. The dog will track in a rural environment. He will track in the forest. He will track on grass. He will track on dirt. He will track somewhere where there's a little bit of vegetation. He would still struggle having to go through the city. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, then you say, okay, now he's more ready. He will track on hard surface. He will go through parking lots. He will go through traveled areas and ignore the other scents, and it will pick up the minute scents that are left on concrete or pavement or something like that, which is more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to make that assessment. We can test that a little bit, but the real test is in the end always when the dog does it for real. And I want to always get the feedback. If you have a track, tell me how it went. If you have body cam footage of the track, show it to me. I want to know how close I was in my estimation or assessment of how the dog will perform for real. It's the same thing when we do a vehicle search for narcotics or something like that. You know, is the dog searching the way I want him to search? Is the dog searching despite the distractions? Does the dog need a lot of handler assistance, or is he as independent as he would be in training? And I want to know those things because at the end of the day, the handler has a job to do, the other officers have their job to do, and the dog has a job to do. And occupying officers and handlers with performing 10% or 15% of a function that the dog should be able to do independently and alone takes 15% away from the job that the handler is supposed to do otherwise, or the other officer. And that's not like if the dog can only bite a person because the handler rushes in and starts pounding on the guy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if that handler needs to take care of suspect number 2?
Yeah.
And he can't help the dog for 20 seconds, half a minute or something like that.
Yeah.
Now that handler has to choose between leaving his dog sort of hanging and out to dry a little bit while he's taking care of his job, because he just doesn't have the capability to help him. The dog has a job to do. And if he can't do that job with more help than a handler in a real world situation may be able to give him, then as trainers, we missed something and we didn't do our job, or the dog is genetically deficient. Those are the things that we need to look at all the time. And that's the big difference, I think, between training and operational realities, because there's a lot of, I know units that just, they do scenarios, they do full mission profiles, they do exercises in different countries, they bring entire units, assaulters, operators, dogs, lots of ammunition, lots of this and that, and they try to play it for real, but it isn't for real. Nobody gets killed. Nobody means to kill you. They're role players, and it's not the same. The people that go out the door every night, or 4 nights a week, 5 nights a week, right? Or the people that go into real war zones and really go into the most hostile situations and fight people that try to kill them. Those are the people that give you the feedback that actually gives you the answers. Because training never gives you the answers. It doesn't. The application of your training does.
So, Armin, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that to learn and to progress, you need feedback. That's right?
You need feedback, but you also need to know the dogs. You need to, I think you need to have known the dog. In order for you to develop and evolve as a trainer, you need to have known a dog before he was deemed mission ready, and then after he was deemed mission ready, and then get the feedback whether he was really mission ready and what pieces he was missing and what he did right and what he did wrong, and how much you missed and how much, it helps you adjust your training. It helps you evaluate everything and look for details. There's one of the things, for example, that I think is really difficult for people to sort of wrap their head around is aggression. Mm-hmm. The human mind has a picture in their mind what aggression looks like. And it usually involves barking. Look at how many people in the sport world in Europe call barking aggression.
Mm-hmm.
They call defense aggression a hold and bark. In IPO, IGP, whatever it's called now, Schutzhund, right? They call going from the bite phase to the aggression phase when the dog outs and barks. Because a bark can look very aggressive. The dog is threatening. The dog shows lots of teeth. The dog is very animated. And, we see people agitating dogs when they're tied up and, they're putting their hands close and the dog is showing their teeth and they're snapping. That's what in the human mind looks like aggression, right? But in a way, it's sort of a little bit of a game that they play. And the dog may just be participating in a game. He might want to really hurt the person, or he might just be participating in this game. He barks a certain way. He's bluffing. And then when we figured he's bluffed for long enough, we offer him a bite on a piece of equipment, a sleeve, a suit, whatever, even a hidden sleeve. Most sleeves aren't hidden for the dog anyway. And it's offered. It's not like the dog just takes it, even though you're trying to not be bitten. You always deliver the bite to the dog in that kind of situation. And because now the people sort of feel that the dog was in a state of aggression when he was showing his teeth and he was barking, doing all that, and then they give him a bite, they figure that the dog is now biting aggressively, and therefore he will bite a human being also without equipment on. But that's faulty. It could be the case, but it could also be, and I would say that more than 50% of the time it is not the case. There's a lot of dogs that put on very, very impressive displays and they bite equipment and that's it. They doesn't bite anything else.
So that's where you need to know the dog, you mean?
You need to know the dog. And you also need to know, for me, people always ask me, how do you know? How do you know? There's a certain feeling. It doesn't have anything to do with how hard a dog bites. It doesn't have anything to do with how much vocalization or how quiet he is. There's something about their body language. There's something about their eyes. There's something about, it's a feeling. There's for a long time when I work dogs, I wear the suit to give the dog something to bite. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it says, damn, I'm glad I had a suit on today. Because if I didn't, like before, it would be if I didn't have a suit on, he wouldn't have bitten anything because he wanted to bite the suit. And then comes a moment in time when you get that feeling where it says the suit was there to protect me.
Yeah.
It wasn't the reason he bit. The reason he bit was because he wanted to hurt me.
Yeah.
Right? The suit protected me from his bite. It wasn't the reason to make him want to bite. It was just something, it was my suit of armor. That's it. And I think recognizing that and then getting the feedback from the handler that says, like, we just, chased a guy that ran from a crime scene and this is what he did. And you go, paha, I felt it. I felt it when I felt the dog was ready. And then he did it, and he did it without hesitation. So whatever feeling I got was probably close to being correct, right? And when you do it once or twice, that helps. When you do it a few hundred times, it helps more. Yeah. When you do it a few thousand times, you're starting to, like, your percentage of error goes way down. And that's just the reality of it. I've worked some really mean dogs. I've worked some really sweet dogs. But when they had to do the job, they all bit people. And that's, a really mean dog. When I started in dogs many, many years ago, there was a lot of dogs that would just bite you for looking at them cross. There were just a lot of mean dogs around. You couldn't go up and pet dogs. They weren't social. You couldn't just hand the leash to someone else and say, hey, hold him for a second. I need to go to the bathroom. They would say, like, who are you holding my leash? Or they would pull and they said, did you just jerk on my chain? And they would just absolutely just have their way with you. Things have changed a little bit. And that's not a bad thing. We have dogs that are very, very exceptional. There's lots of dogs I worked 30 years ago that would never be able to do the work that I participate in now. They just can't do it. They can't switch back and forth. They can't switch that side of them off. They can't discriminate. The control was very difficult. A lot of them were noisy. So there's downsides to that, but it was a giant crutch for trainers. Let's just make them mean. Let's just be a little bit harsh with them, a little bit shitty with them, and they say, all right, I want to hurt everybody. I want to kill everybody. Anybody looks at me cross, everybody comes within leash range. They're here to pinch me, hit me with a stick, do something shitty. So I'm going to bite them before they have a chance. And that was for many, many years the approach to all this. There's a lot of police departments here in the U.S. that were disbanded because of how many officers dogs bit. And it wasn't during deployments where everything kind of went crazy. It was just walking through a parking lot and somebody got too close and they would just go and send somebody to the hospital. It's those dogs were pretty reliable on the street, but they also were a real liability on the other hand, and part of it was the personalities of the dogs that were picked, and some of it was the training. It was just not, it wasn't very smart training. Let's say it that way. It was, trial and error, figure it out, and throw a shovel of wet dirt on a wall and see what sticks. And it's not always good. I think training has really improved in many, many ways, but there are still things that are hard for people to wrap their heads around, because it taps into an emotional side. Like there's a lot of people, for example, when we talk about aggression, that talk about aggression, but they have never really experienced any. Like there's a lot of people now, there's a lot, even people that do, mixed martial arts. A lot of people are in the BJJ. And I think those sports are very good for decoys because they teach a lot about physical coordination, and they teach you a little bit about sucking up some pain. There's some people that just only like getting pinched in the suit. So if you do some, martial arts fighting or jiu-jitsu or something like that, and you get bruised and you get pinched and you get choked and you get armbarred and things like that, you get used to dealing with a little bit of pain. So I think that's very good preparation for being a helper or a decoy, right?
Yeah.
But there's videos online where people get into real fights, right? And somebody gets a chokehold on them and they tap. Well, do you think I'm going to let you go if you tap in a real fight? I'm going to make sure you're out before I let you go.
Yeah, of course.
Right? So the fact that they have the fact that somebody even thinks about tapping shows you that they haven't really ever been in a real fight, that they have never really felt what it's like to be in peril, to be in danger, where if you don't get this done, you're going to get really, really hurt, maybe killed. And look, when, I may be a little bit older than you guys, but you're still of a generation that's closer to mine than a lot of the kids that are coming up. I wonder nowadays where new police officers are coming from. Like, where do you hire people?
Yeah. It's difficult.
If like when I was a kid, you had an argument with somebody and it got a little bit rough. You had a fight, you punched each other in the face a few times and maybe got, sent home from school, or the principal called your parents or something like that. And that was it.
Yeah.
Today, if you get in a fight where you punch somebody and you bloody their nose, you might be expelled from school forever.
Yeah.
Which means you can't graduate high school. You're never going to get on a police department if you don't even have a high school diploma. So who are the people that are police officers? They have never been in any kind of a physical confrontation that was in any way, shape, or form serious until they went to the police academy. That's a big culture shock.
Getting back to something, Armin, back to something, because I'm always very, very interested in how do you teach others to be able to do what you do, because you have so much experience. And years and years of watching and observing and feeling, and getting a feel for. That's what I hear a lot from trainers that I really do look up to as well. But I have a couple of trainers I look up to as well that say, well, you shouldn't be counting only on the feel for. You should be able to break things down into steps and be able to, so as to teach someone else. I mean, it's not to only be training the dog itself, but to teach someone else how to train a dog. So how do you, is it how methodological do you think when you are teaching someone else to train a dog? So not
So
training the dog itself.
yeah, I mean, if you guys have written or read some of my articles, I'm a very detail oriented person. I don't write lesson plans for the masses, right? Every dog is a little bit different, so you need to adjust. But I'm very nuanced, detailed in what we're trying to achieve. So when we used the word goal earlier, the goal for me is function for real. So I have certain training techniques and approaches and methods, if you want to say, that get a dog there. Now they don't. The method is, for example, I like to get dogs to bite for real through frustration more than through defense, because it's safer, and a lot of dogs that we buy, especially in this day and age, aren't really defensively aggressive anyways. They're just not. And I think if we teach the dogs aggression through another way, and once they have an aggressive response and we guide them slowly into defensive feelings, they in fact have a better chance to finding an aggressive response when that weird feeling kicks in than a dog that is basically should find it on their genetics. There are some dogs that do, but there's not enough of them. So how do we get a dog frustrated? Well, there's different ways to do that. And if you just think about frustration, some dogs are very movement oriented. So restricting the movement and handicapping how they can move, so they get, I want to move faster and I can't, and it pisses me off. Another dog is very prey driven, and not letting them access his prey item until he gets mad, where he cares more about just expressing his frustration than actually making prey. Now you have that dog in a more aggressive state of mind, et cetera, et cetera. There is ways to get that done, but you can't say that every dog should have restricted movement in order to get frustrated, right? And not every dog will get aggressive through frustration just by making him miss like a sleeve or something like that 20 times. Just because you make a dog miss a sleeve 20 times and it just clacks air doesn't mean that the 21st time he bites, he would bite with malice. Some dogs will, some dogs won't. Other dogs need to chase halfway down a soccer field, dragging somebody behind them. And then when they get there, they're frustrated enough because they like to move and they can't express their physical energy enough. So there's different ways to do it. You just have to find ways to frustrate a dog. And you have to, in order to do that, you have to develop actually quite a bit of foundation in a dog. I mean, that's one of the reasons we buy. When I go and buy dogs, I want that the dog loves to play with a toy and likes to bite. And they show me biting technique. I said, that dog bites because you taught him.
Yeah.
I want a dog that loves to bite. I don't care what reason he bites for, as long as he's lustful and passionate about biting, because it's so much easier for me to make that dog frustrated than a dog that was taught technical biting.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the important aspect of it all. You can't really test whether a dog will bite defensively, because nobody offers their bare arm, right? And you shouldn't really offer it. But if I threaten a dog and the dog is really pissed and you cut him loose, I should just stand there passive like this and you should just whack me somewhere. Nobody does that without equipment on, right? And if you don't do it without equipment on, we don't know if the dog is channeling back into prey and he's biting the equipment, or if he's really biting in aggression. So we need to find that the dog reaches, and my definition of aggression, if you've read my article, is a state of emotional excitement and arousal that leads an individual to do violence to someone else. Violence, harm. There has to be malicious intent. And we need to find how to do that. Now, if a dog bites only to defend himself, if a guy runs away and climbs a fence, why would the dog still want to bite him? There's no threat. There's no danger. It's completely invasive. Yeah. People need to understand that dogs will not bite a human being in prey. This entire thing that run away from a dog in the muzzle and that you're shifting the dog into prey drive. You're not. The dog will not bite humans in prey. If there is 1 in 1,000 that does, I'm not going to put my eggs in that basket. right? It's a waste of time. So
Yeah.
we have to understand that prey drive is a very, very important part of our teaching. Prey in our training is the equipment.
Yeah.
It has value, and we have to have it. There's no question about it. Prey drive lets the dog track. Prey drive lets the dog search. Prey drive, all the technique in biting comes from prey drive. So we need prey drive, but prey drive will not make a dog bite a human being with malice and malicious intent. And the sooner people understand that, the better it is. It's to me, it's very important that people understand the function. The function is the willingness to do harm when confronting somebody that you found or who's coming at you or something like that. And that's how do we get there, right? And there's different ways to get there, and there's descriptions. So back to Minke's question about how do I teach others? When I teach decoys, right? And you know some of the people that come over here and they bring their decoys because they want me to teach them things. I explain stuff to them and they kind of give you that, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. But they've not really seen it. They don't understand it. They don't get it. So I have them work the dog. And they work the dog, and I tell them a little bit, hey, do this and do that. And then they say, oh, so-and-so told me if I do this, it really makes the dogs mad. I said, just do your work, show me the dog, work the dog. Well, now I'm using pressure. I said, well, does the dog see it as pressure? Because there's a lot of dogs, and a lot of the dogs we buy are environmentally very stable. They just don't care. You know what I mean? You throw them on top of a table, the dogs laugh at that. That's not pressure.
Yeah.
The yelling, you know, like a lot of what we do in KMPV, the yelling and stuff like that. The dogs almost feed off that. It's fun for them, right?
Yeah.
It stimulates them. It's not pressure, right? And I said, like, what did you see in the dog that made you think it was pressure? And they can't explain it. They felt what they were doing was harsh and strong and assertive and mean, and the dog should have felt worried about it and pressured by it.
But you have it. The dog should have felt,
but they don't see whether the dog does or not, right?
No.
And the other thing is the assumption that a dog will automatically respond back with aggression or malice just because you put pressure on him. A lot of times, if the dog does take it as pressure, there's a bigger chance that the dog will pop off the bite the first few times than him actually responding with some kind of an assertiveness technique, right? So then I usually get in the suit and I work the same dogs. It just worked. And then all of a sudden they kind of go, what the fuck happened to that dog?
Yeah.
Like, what happened?
Yeah.
Like, why is he so angry? Why is he so mean? Why does he look at you like he wants to murder you?
Yeah.
Because I push his buttons and I don't throw them around. I'm not a big guy. I'm not a young guy, that's for sure. And I've had obviously injuries. So, but it's an emotional thing. It's making the dog feel something. And I tell people right off the bat, when you watch me work dogs, and then the next time they work a dog, they try to make the same sound I make. I said, it's not your sound, right? So the dogs don't buy it.
Yeah.
I create a feeling in the dog. You need to find a way. You need to experiment around. And even though you're here to learn, if these are dogs that are supposed to be war dogs, right? If you scare a war dog too much and he comes off, we'll fix it. It's not the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
You have the freedom to experiment and play around a little bit. Just don't get stuck into going through a gauntlet of busy stuff that doesn't have any result. If you want the dog to respond a certain way and you use a technique to try to create that response and the dog does not respond, stop doing it. Do something different until you find something where the dog shows you something that you actually pushed a button. Because that's what I do. How I push the buttons, that's uniquely my thing. Maybe you can do the same way. Most likely you cannot. So you need to find your own way to do it.
Yeah.
Right? There are people that are very big. They can use their strength and their physical power to show dog things that I may not be able to do. Like I used to be able to throw dogs up and carry them around and do all that kind of stuff. I have to work really hard to do that now. And it's not necessary. I can get the job done another way. And I need to make sure that the dog that the dog has to earn it. That's the one thing I think that's very different when I work dogs. When we do a scenario, the dog gets somewhere, the dog finds me, the dog bites me, right? So it should be a reward for the dog, and it is. But once he hits me, he has to work. He has to earn his keep. He has to, like, this is not easy. There's no gimmies. I give him the jacket afterwards, and it's one of your questions. We'll get to that a little later.
Yeah.
But he's going to have to work through whatever happens from when he makes contact with me and the rest of the troop shows up. And it's hard work. It's psychologically hard. Sometimes it's physically hard. But there isn't just sort of a beat me up. I'm just a punch dummy. And I think that's a big thing that people miss. There's a lot of people that talk about how hard the dogs bite. Wear a thicker suit. Wear extra protection underneath.
Yeah.
Or suck it up. Like I always get a kick out of people. They come into the house with a bite suit and one gauntlet. Well, what side do you want me to catch him on? I said, I don't want you to offer him anything. I want the dog to pick something. Well, what side should I put the gauntlet on? Well, you should have brought two.
Yeah.
And on the arm that you don't have a gauntlet on, it just hurts a little bit more. Suck it up. Like, I don't understand that. You're in a fighting situation. And like when I travel, I take a semi-comp suit. There are some dogs that hurt a lot in a semi-comp suit. If you work dogs 5 days in a row and you work 20 of them a day, by day 5, some of those big, 40-kilo dogs, when they're crunching on you in a semi-comp, you can feel it, right? Yeah. That's just the nature of the job. If you don't want to do that, you're in the wrong job. If you're always worried about, well, is something sticking out? What if he bites me here? What if he bites me there? Then he bites you there. Like you have protection on it, yeah, but it's thinner there. You're not going to the hospital. It just hurts a little bit more. I think people just need to just forget about all that. Like it blows my mind how many people don't put on a cup. I will take all my shit off and put a cup on if I forget, right? Because if a dog bites me, especially in the dark, or if you're on stairs or in some weird environment or whatever, he bites me like upper thigh, right in the crotch. The last thing I want to do is worry about whether he's going to hurt my junk.
Yeah.
I'm there to work the dog. If I have to go, oh, he's getting up there, get him off. The whole exercise, he just had an easy end. Yeah. He didn't have to earn it anymore. He had me literally by the balls. and it ended, right? That's in training, that's too easy of an end. It doesn't have to be mean. It just has to be difficult. There must be struggle. There must be opposition. There must be strenuous, vigorous work involved. And if people aren't doing that, they're not building the dogs. They're not.
Yeah. So Armin, if I understand correctly, because I'm not at all, not at all, just a small, tiny bit of IGP I've done with one of my dogs. So I don't have much experience in that at all. But would you say that what's very important is the intention with what you are doing things? Because what I'm always trying to find is like good trainers such as yourself. How do you explain things to others? So like you've already said, I tell people, you start by talking and telling people about things, and then you show them, and then you let them work dogs, and then, or you let them work first, and then you show them what the dog does with you.
Yeah. And then they work the dog again. And then I can, now that they've seen me work the dogs, maybe then I can coach them a little bit. Yeah. And show them things that they can do differently. Slow down. That's one of the things. The other thing is I do a lot of theoretical discussion. I break stuff down. I explain the drives a lot, the way they actually make sense in nature, not what humans have made of them. In dog training, using the word drive is like, nobody knows what you're talking about. Everybody has a different interpretation, but it's an interpretation. It's a scientific term that if you stick to the definitions of it, it's actually there's very few drives, and it's pretty easy to understand. I've got articles written. I have techniques that help the dog kind of work through that. They're very simple techniques. When I do decoy classes, I do interactive decoying. One of the things I want, of course, is a push bite, right? Most of the time, the pushing comes, it's basically a prey channel. The dog isn't really in aggression. Even though the dog is driving in, the dog is doing something that every predator does when he's trying to get a better hold of something. That's it. That's all he's doing. And the decoy just sort of momentarily bothers the dog, and then he gets soft again, and the dog pushes. And then he bothers the dog, and he gets soft again, and the dog pushes. Well, the dog's not countering, and the dog's not fighting. The dog's just filling his mouth for pleasure, which is good, but it's not the end stage, right? It's where it should have. It's where it should begin. It definitely should begin. That's one of the reasons I like buying dogs from the KMPV programs, because there's so many helpers in the KMPV that are very, very good in creating the push bite technique, probably better than anywhere else in the world. Part of it is because it's prized in KMPV, and it's necessary in KMPV, because in KMPV, when the dog makes contact with a decoy, right, the interaction lasts for less than 10 seconds. Then the decoy freezes, right? The dog's not supposed to let go or change the grip or do anything like that. And by the time the handler has to travel 120 meters to get there, right? That takes a handler a hell of a lot longer than 10 seconds. What does a dog do in the meantime? The dogs that keep on just pushing into the bite the entire time while they're waiting for the handler to show up, they look great and they're happy. They're in a happy place, which means they're going to out easier, right? The dogs that are stressed, the pullers, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like by the time the handler gets there, they've been stressed out for 25 seconds. Those dogs don't out easy. The dog goes, I love this. I love this. And then you say, hey, time to quit, dude. Let go. That dog is a hell of a lot easier to out in sport. So I think there's a functional reason for why that is taught so well in KMPV. But I like the technique because it's a feel-good technique for the dog. And it comes from inside. The dog, just like, if you watch, I don't know if it's as big in Europe as it is over here, but a lot of the very theatrical decoys react always very strong to when a dog pushes in. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you act weak when the dog pushes. All right. Now, if you've ever been in a fight, how hard is it to beat up a weakling that cries every time you slap him?
Yeah.
Like after a while, you start feeling bad for beating up a wimp.
Yeah.
A guy that takes you says, "Is that the best you got?" That makes you do it harder. That makes you mad. That makes you sort of rise to the occasion. Beating up somebody who acts weak all the time, that's not a way to build anything. The other thing is, I believe that the push itself is a much, much bigger reward than the dog gets from the weak act of a decoy. Right? And the other thing is, having been at real live bites, a dog that actually senses fear and a response to pain acts way different than the dogs react to the acting of a decoy. So if the dogs are not acting the way we want them to act based on the theory, oh, if I act weak, he thinks he's hurting me, but the dog really doesn't act like he feels he's hurting you, because I've seen what dogs act like when they think they're hurting you, then the purpose of your intent is not met. So change what you're doing. Otherwise it's just wasted time. I don't think it harms a dog for you to do the marking and the reacting, but I don't think it does what people think it does. They think that by marking it and rewarding the dog with weakness, it builds the dog's confidence. It doesn't build a dog's confidence if you always act weak.
Yeah.
Fighting somebody stronger than you and winning in the end builds confidence. Beating somebody up who's weaker than you doesn't build your confidence. It doesn't. And it doesn't make you angry. It doesn't make you rise to the occasion. It doesn't. So I think that's one of the things. One of the things I do is I teach the push bite for dogs that don't already have it. But I teach the push bite, and I want to make sure that a decoy can pretty much activate it as well. I just want them to do it. As long as the dog does it for their own pleasure, great. Then we're going to start creating difficulty so that the dog cannot achieve that pleasurable feeling as easy as before. He has to now work for it. I want that feeling back. And now you're getting into a form of frustration. The dog says, I want that good, pleasurable feeling. And it's hard. It could just be physically hard. let's say I use a table. Maybe a table doesn't scare him, but if I slowly drag the dog up over the edge and he's going to hang in there and he doesn't have his feet under him, he goes, oh, I can't push, I can't fill my mouth. He's going to get frustrated that he cannot achieve that pleasurable feeling. And by the time you get him up on the table and he finally can, he goes, motherfucker, why was it so hard? And now he's a little angry because he had to work so hard for it. And it's not scary yet. And it shouldn't be scary yet. The psychological opposition has to come later. The physical opposition, like you can crawl up a set of stairs on all fours. After a while, the dog is going like, where are you taking me? Where are you taking me? And all of a sudden he goes like, I want that feeling back. And he starts pushing. And you start feeling that there's a different vibe to the push. It is more intense. It's more purposeful. He's doing it because he needs it now, because he goes, I hate these fucking stairs, but this makes me feel good. And he's starting to grow in intensity and power. And that's where you start getting to a dog that is potentially malicious and violent. And that's ultimately what we want. And people have this feeling. So I don't know if I did this last time, but the term frustration aggression is, people throw it around, but they don't really have a good sort of mental picture of it. Mm-hmm. Frustration aggression is easiest achieved by something positively important to an individual. Okay? So let's say the closest human example they can come up with that most people empathize with is road rage, right? So let's say that you have to get somebody really, really important, something that's really important to you, birth of a child, maybe a vacation you've been waiting for and saving up for, and you're late for the airport, but it's something really fun, really pleasurable, something you really, really want, nothing negative about it. Right? A job interview, something that is really positive for you. You need to get there. And when you get there, something really awesome is happening for you, right? So totally positive. The end goal is positive, like the suit top might be for the dog, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now you're driving and you look at your watch and you realize that you're running maybe a little late. And traffic is getting slower and slower and slower. And you keep looking at your watch and you realize you might miss that really pleasurable, important thing. And the first thing that happens with all of us, I mean, I don't know you guys personally, but for me, the first thing that happens is I start cursing at other drivers.
Yes.
Dumbass, what are you doing? Don't you know how to drive, right? Everybody gets mad. You start hitting the steering wheel like, son of a bitch, why do you have to do that? Don't you know how to drive, right? That's the first thing. So you're getting angry. You're getting angry because you're trying to get to the birth of your baby. Think about that, right? Yeah. So now as you're going, traffic is getting even slower, even slower, even slower, and you're getting more and more frustrated and more anxious and more angry in a way, right? So now you're driving and somebody cuts in front of you. Couldn't have waited another car length. No, he had to cut you off and cut in front of you. So for you now, it feels not only are you not getting where you want to go as fast as you want to go, let's knock it off. But now it feels like you were actually pushed farther away. So you're even more frustrated. So you honk at the guy, right? And the guy gets out of his car and walks back to yours. How close are you to punching the guy in the face?
You want to kick his ass.
There you go. So you're willing to kick another human being's ass because you're late for your baby's birth. Mm-hmm. That's frustration aggression, right? So when you say, well, dogs shouldn't have equipment fixation, they shouldn't have a lust for equipment. Well, guess what? The equipment is the baby, the vacation, the positive end goal. You're just making it hard to achieve. And if you make it hard enough, the dog's going to get frustrated. And if he gets frustrated enough, he gets pissed off. And then if you put yourself in the middle of it, it's just, you're going to now pay for my frustration and now I'm going to beat you up. And now he's aggressive. Because all I need him to do is be willing to do violence. That's it. Then he's in aggression.
In relation to what you're telling us, one of the questions we asked here was about the different views that people have about letting the dog win the jacket after a bite. Some people say, hey, if you do that, then you take away the interest for the dog in the suspect because the dog walks away with the jacket. and other people have a different opinion. I had the chance to train with a couple of military working dog handlers who also visit your facility, or you visit them, and they all do the same. So they let the dog get a bite, and then the decoy offers the jacket to the dog.
And then they give him a tug afterwards to get him off the jacket.
Yeah. What's your view?
Okay. So the people you worked with, okay, let's not name any names. One of them is redheaded and tall.
Yes.
Okay. When that dog first came here, he was trained more traditional with the mindset that the dog needs to be focused on the man, never get the equipment, be either lifted off or sticked off or outed, right?
Yeah.
Well, that dog wasn't going to bite anybody anyways. He was just biting equipment when he came here. So what did all that training do? Then he started training with me, right? And we do this all the time. Not every time. Sometimes he has to out and sometimes he is lifted off. But I would say 90% of the time when he bites, at the end, he gets the jacket given to him, all right? Would you sit in a house without equipment on with that dog if he came in?
No way.
Right?
No way.
So look, here's the thing. If you use, let's relax, dude. If you're putting a guy in a bite suit, the dog's not looking for a human without equipment on anyways. Right? And the moment he identifies the guy in the bite suit, he's biting the guy in a bite suit. He might bite him maliciously, but he's biting him in a bite suit.
Yeah.
The fact that he's not identifying the guy and not caring as much about the guy once the bite suit comes off isn't that relevant, because that's a situation that never happens in the real world. Now, if a dog does not see any reason to engage a guy that doesn't have a bite suit on, that's a problem, right? But ending a bite, the dog has to earn, especially if, like I said, if I work him, the dog has to earn the bite through quite a bit of difficulty. And it's hard earned and it needs to end somehow. So how do we want to end it? Do we want to stick a piece of metal in his mouth so he kind of goes, oh, that was crap, and then he comes off? And now he's still looking at a guy in a bite suit. So where's the focus to the guy without the bite suit on? There isn't one. The guy's still wearing the suit, isn't he?
Yeah.
Right? Same with the lift off. So you go up, you grab him by the collar, and you kind of gag him. And when the dog goes, oh, and he comes off, he's still looking at a guy in a bite suit. So he's not really changing his mind from suit to civil, right?
Yeah.
If you do a verbal out and the dog didn't learn a verbal out properly, and he's basically outing because doesn't want to be corrected. So a little bit of a suppressive, maybe fear of reprisal type of an out, which many outs are, right? So now the dog goes, oh, I got to give up. Sorry, I'm good. I'm done now, right? Yeah. How good of an end is that? And the guy's still wearing the suit. So he's still just looking at a guy in a suit, right? So the dog fights. All of a sudden the jacket drops. He goes, yeah, motherfucker, it's mine, bitch.
Yeah.
And then it's over. And he felt great the entire time. Then we trick him off the jacket. And it's over. And he feels like a rock star. And while he was biting me, he wanted to beat the crap out of me the whole time. He wasn't biting just the suit. He was biting. He's threatening to get at me through the suit, right? And I just ended without stress. That's all it is, right? Now, if he comes in the building and I don't have a suit on, and he goes in the room and he sees me and then says, where's the guy in the suit? That's a problem.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen because we do the other as well. We do the civil, we do the muzzle, we do hidden equipment and stuff like that. But it's a low percentage because the emotional state is the same. I get emails and texts and messages from people all the time. I had a failed engagement, and I see them sometimes talking on chat boards about it. And the first thing people do, wow, that's equipment fixation, and and he needs to do more civil, and he needs to do this, and he needs to do that. I'm going, the dog ran after the guy with no suit on, right? He ran right up to him without a suit on, right? Okay. So identifying somebody in civilian clothing is not your issue. He didn't have a reason to bite because his reason to bite is prey. He bites equipment. Yeah. He doesn't bite in aggression. That's it. The identification of the guy without the suit on has already been created. You've done enough work for that. What you haven't done is create aggression.
Yeah.
right? Because if a dog that's pissed off, that just wants to kick ass, comes up to somebody that doesn't have a suit on, he still wants to kick somebody's ass, right? The civil part is really just for the identification. The mental state and the emotional state that allows the dog to bite is the important part. I know the others are howling, but we can hear you because you're right next to me. So that's, I think, look, I do this with dogs all the time. The dogs that I put out, knock on wood, have never missed a bite. And they all do the same training. They all get the jacket and they all get the tug.
Yeah.
Right? They all do verbal outs. They all know how to use a stick, and they all do physical liftoffs in case the situation on the street demands that. That's it.
Yeah.
They bite passive people. They bite active people. They bite people discriminating SWAT team members and biting bad guys. They run through flashbang smoke and all kinds of other stuff. They bite the bad guys. They don't bite the good guys, and they get all the same training. So I want the dogs to have the lust for equipment because it allows me to create frustration aggression easier, because the dog is just so intent on that, on winning that jacket in the beginning. We take a lot of handler conflict away, because a lot of dogs that always get lifted off and always get sticked. That was one of the problem with Mr. Redhead's dog, that when the handler approached him before he started training with me, the dog would circle away, the grip would go to shit. He would sometimes even come off because he was worried about having that brake stick stuck in his mouth all the time.
Yeah.
It's not a pleasant thing. And every handler needs to know how to do that, because there's plenty of situations on the street where you have to do it that way. But it's a negative end. And if the dog had to, if the dog had to fight hard to earn something, he should earn something. It shouldn't end with a demoralizing experience. It just shouldn't. Yeah. And that's been my philosophy for a long time. I have told people, if they're willing to sign a waiver, they can go sit in a house and I send a dog in. And if my dogs are all equipment dogs, then you really have nothing to worry about. So go have at it. Yeah. But people don't want to take me up on the offer. So it's.
I wonder why.
Well, because the dogs do it for real, and I'm not talking about. I'm not a theoretician. Like, I can talk theory, but I know that the training I do works in the real world because it's tested all the time in the real world. Yeah. And I get the feedback, and I get the photographs, and I get the body cam footages, and I get all that stuff of what really happened and how the dogs performed. You know, and when a dog jumps in through a window, as a SWAT team comes in through a door throwing a flashbang, and the dog runs in, looks through the smoke, sees a SWAT team member, turns his head, a guy is sitting on a bed, and the dog just nails the guy in the leg on the bed. Like, there was no running away, there was no action, there was no attraction, there was no big fight. The dog discriminated the good guys and violently bit the bad guy. And that's all I care about in the end. And if people don't like it, that's okay. They can train any way they want. If they create the same reliability, good for them. You know what I mean? Proof's in the pudding.
That you have also seen a lot of deployments, for instance, in the Netherlands with patrol dogs, which are failing. Can we conclude that perhaps the way they train is too much focused on certification, a little bit what they like to call practical training, as far as you can actually determine that it's practical training, and then put those dogs on the street because the certification for them is a goal instead of a mean?
Yeah, look, there's one of the problems I think in the Netherlands in the police world is, number one, I know they buy green dogs more now too, but for many, many years, they basically bought PH1 dogs.
Yeah.
Right? Because the PH1 is very, very close to the street certification. It's just done in a slightly different environment, but the exercises are virtually identical, right?
Yeah.
You have the option of the article indication versus the article retrieval and stuff like that. But you have the same call off, you have the same standoff, you have the same courage test, you have the same revolver attack and bicycle and all that. You have the same exercises. That's supposed to be changing now because of all the political nonsense that's going on, but that's a different story. But when people come from the Netherlands and they teach seminars and classes in the US, and the first thing out of their mouth is, all you need to train a reliable police dog is KMPV, then you have a mindset, and these people are active instructors in your police system. You see where the problem comes in. Like, they're active KMPV competitors. Were, when they were younger, active KMPV trial decoys, and they are also active trainers in the police system. If they believe that a dog that does the KMPV exercise is ready to rock on the street, they are missing a whole lot. And there are KMPV dogs that are. There's no question about it. There's some KMPV dogs that when they come off the trial field, they will hit the guy running in a Speedo down the road.
Yeah.
But 90 out of 100 will not. They need to do other training. And, you know, there's an instructor from your country called Dick Van Lenen.
Yes, I know him.
Okay. He is a guy that he still does some KMPV-ish stuff because he was involved in that system too. But he always talks about the 1%, the really difficult opponent, the really difficult enemy. Mm-hmm. And he does all kinds of stuff. He does muzzle, he does newspaper, he does lots of stuff extra above and beyond. And there's some stuff that I think is too staged, but that's neither here nor there. At least he realizes that he needs to do more than KMPV. It's the same, like, look, there's lots of dogs that before people even discovered KMPV dogs in North America, they bought mainly Schutzhund dogs. And the dogs were shitting the bed left and right. They were just not engaging. They were looking for a sleeve on the form, and it was just a horror show. And people, you know, the other thing that you guys are realizing, in the Netherlands and in Europe overall, is that you're losing your homogenous society. Mm-hmm. And people aren't as polite. People don't know each other. People don't have the same social inhibitions anymore. And you've had in the last 10 years an increase in violent crime in the Netherlands and Germany and Belgium and France, basically most of Europe, Great Britain. Europe has seen an increase in violent crime in the last 10 years at a rate that has never been seen before. Mm-hmm. And it's because a large influx of foreign elements that just have a different outlook on society. It's not that they come to commit crimes necessarily. They just look at things differently. And that whole sort of, I know my neighbor and I'm not going to go and, you know, injure my neighbor. You get into an argument, maybe you smack each other a couple of times, you apologize the next day, it's over. That's no longer the case. You're dealing with people that are different. And America has had to deal with the melting pot for a long, long time. You have people from all over the world in large percentages, in large groups here, and they have different mentalities. America is also a very large country where you can murder somebody in New York and jump on a plane or jump in a bus, and you're on the West Coast in a couple of days. Nobody knows you there. They don't even connect you with anything. You know, with social media and stuff, maybe things are or cameras everywhere. It's a little easier now, but let's say 20 years ago, when all that stuff didn't exist, you could just disappear, and they did. There's lots of people that just disappeared after committing violent crimes. So the urgency to catch people, it was a little bit greater. The willingness to fight the police, because you fight the police in a small town in the Netherlands. Well, you got to go home. Where are you going to go? Yeah. So sooner or later, if somebody says, "Oh, that was Johan from, you know, such and such a street," they're going to pick you up in a couple of days. Yeah. In America, if you got away, there's a chance that you could be free. Yeah. You know, we see that in the Wild West movies. Let's ride to Mexico and get out of here. Nobody can find us. Yeah. That mentality exists, which means, you know, we also have much stiffer penalties. You know, we still have in many states the death penalty. Mm-hmm. And some of the three strikers, like we had this 3 strike laws, three felonies, you automatically go to jail for life, go to prison for life, right? 25 years to life. That's a long time. So the desperation in people to try to evade law enforcement after committing their 3rd felony was high. The death penalty, if you committed murder, that's you're willing to do a lot of crazy violent stuff to not be caught. And I think American police have had to deal with that confrontational violence by suspects and people they had to go after for much, much longer than European agencies have. And, to be fair, I grew up in the 70s in Germany, and there was a lot of domestic terrorism going on. Red Army, Bader Meinhof gang, and all those groups back then. So there were actually, the GSG9 had some pretty nice dogs then, and there was some real serious efforts to try to fight groups like that. But after that, it kind of got a little bit softer. And, I think the realization that I think if you really look at a lot of the failures that you guys are having, who are you having them with? They're not your typical Dutchman, right?
Mm-hmm.
They come from somewhere else, and it's because they act different. They have a different outlook. They don't have the same respect for authority. They're not as polite. They come from a different society. They live by different rules. That doesn't necessarily make them automatically evil or bad or anything. I don't want to sound like that, but they're different. They don't behave the same way. And all of a sudden, you have a police officer with a dog that's dealing with somebody that's acting in a way that they can't even predict. It makes no sense to them. Why is this guy not afraid of police? Why is this guy not going, oh my God, I'm going to get arrested? Yeah. Because getting arrested in the Netherlands and sent to jail is like going to a vacation for some of those people. They don't care. It doesn't scare them. It's not like, in the Netherlands, you get arrested, you go to jail. Like, that's a big shame on your family, and nobody wants it. So oh, sorry, officer, of course I come willingly. I'm not going to put up a fight. It's a different mentality. And having to deal with people that you've never had to deal with before, it makes it difficult. And I think there's a lot of learning going on that needs to be caught up. And I think, I've had many conversations with police officers from the Netherlands and also from Germany that talk about, well, we do this and we do that. I said, we can't do that. The likelihood of somebody in the US carrying a gun when we encounter them is very, very high compared to European countries. And the likelihood of somebody violently fighting, using any means necessary to get away, is way, way higher. It's a more violent society. There's no question. I love America and all that kind of stuff, but nobody can say that it is not a more violent country than Europe is. There's no question. And because the police have had to deal with that violence for so much longer, the police dogs have had as well. And the police dogs training was started sort of the European way. And they realized very quickly that it wasn't enough. And they tried their best to evolve. And a lot of places they have, especially in some of the areas like Florida, Southern California, Texas, some places like that, they've made great strides in developing programs where the dogs are. The reliability of the dogs is way, way, way higher there than it is in other parts of the country where the crime is a little bit less, and like in Europe. So, and that's just, I think it's an evolution. It's just if you have to deal with it, you find, just like I lived in Canada after moving from Germany. I moved to Canada first, and I remember when I was working private security with dogs, the police were still only allowed to carry revolvers with 38 caliber revolvers, and they were not allowed to shoot hollow points. They had to use lead bullets. And like, you could buy hollow points in the store, and you could buy an automatic in the store if you filled out all the paper. It was difficult in Canada, but you could do it. Right? The police were completely outgunned. It took years for them to get that changed because they had to catch up with some of that stuff. And the restrictions that were put on them was just very high. And I think it's changed a lot. And in America, it's just changed faster because there's more people and more crime and so on and so forth. And that's, that's not, I'm not saying that is something to be proud of, but it's something that drives the evolution faster. It just does. So,
another question we had for you, or perhaps you would like to explain it a little bit more, was about the way you teach capping and what capping actually means.
Okay. So capping is one of those things that I wrote about it in an article about 25 years ago, and it's really the first place where I've ever seen it written. The term was used maybe before I wrote it down, but it's sort of, what does it mean? So for me, it always meant, like, if you imagine that all the motivations and drives and whatever gets a dog to do things is like the carbonation in a soda, like a Coca-Cola, right? And when you're activating drive, it's the same as shaking up a Coca-Cola, right? And in order to keep all the carbonation and all the fizz inside, you got to put a cap on it,
Mm-hmm.
And then you contain all that built up pressure and power. And if in the case of a bottle of champagne, you know what a champagne cork can do if you shoot it at somebody, right?
Yeah.
It can break a window. So you're harnessing power. So capping in a way is sort of an internal harnessing of power and drive, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no way to teach it. There's no way to make a dog do it. There are ways to allow a dog to find it. And because humans are very controlling and a little control freakish, and especially in the police dog world, there's a strong prevalence still of the word dominant and respect and things like that. So when a dog does not find things on their own fast enough, the human imposes their will on them and basically makes it impossible for the dog to ever learn it or find it. And as a result, we suppress drive, right? So basically we crack the bottle and some of the fizz comes out somewhere else and it's gone and you no longer harness anything. So that's one of the difficulties, that people just aren't patient enough, and they don't. I know there's people that teach this in America. Somebody has a big podcast and does a lot of seminars as well. And he talks about capping all the time. And he basically uses a phrase from my old article, almost word for word.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way he describes it is correct. Then he tells you how he teaches it. And then you realize that he doesn't really understand what it is. Because for some people, capping is obedience. Laying down is capping. Yeah? For other people, as long as the dog is quiet, he's capping. Right?
Yeah.
One of the things that's missing almost with everybody that talks about capping or tries to teach capping is the assessment of whether the dog is really capping. Right? So let's say you have a dog who you hold him by the collar or by the harness or whatever, and you let him go just crazy. He sees a decoy, whatever, right? And he's just wide open, nothing holds him back except for your hand, and he's basically going nuts. And you let him go 10 meters. Well, how does he hit? How does he bite? What does that feel like, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can assume that the dog came probably with 90% plus of what motivates him, right?
Yeah.
So now you attempt to help the dog cap. So you hold him and you try to make him quiet. You try to tell him, hey, be quiet, don't bark.
Mm-hmm.
And he finally shuts up. And then you send him. And the bite's not the same. It's not as intense. It's not as hard. It's not as vigorous, right?
Mm-hmm.
The dog wasn't capping. He lost some of his drive. He gave some of his drive up, which is what made him quiet.
Yeah.
He didn't contain all that drive and keep it inside. He just let some of it go away. It's the same thing if you put a dog in a down. If the dog is in the down and you send him, and again, he doesn't bite like he bites when he's wide open, the down took some of his power away, because in order for him to lay down, he had to give up some of his own determination, his own drive, and he lost some of his intensity. And so those are the biggest problems, that people don't assess that. So they try to do something to get the picture of capping, which is holding still and being quiet, right? That's what most people associate with capping.
Yeah.
Holding still and being quiet and being obedient. And once a dog learns how to cap, it makes it much easier for him to be obedient while he's high in drive.
Yeah.
But just because you make him do obedience doesn't mean he's capping. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely, yeah.
But once he can cap, he can do obedience easier. So the other thing is, and again, in the law enforcement world is behind the sport world, right? The sport world, I think KMPV has not gotten as technically insane as IPO has. It's just some of the things they do in IGP now is just so like robotic and stuff. It's crazy. And it's very sort of impressive to watch in many ways, because like that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of skill and technical expertise and stuff like that. But it's robotic, and the dog basically has no free will. But
Yes.
It's impressive to watch. But in the real world, we don't do the dogs gradual enough. And the one thing that everybody in the real world, police and military, is worried about is whether the dog will do the job under stress, and whether they will do it with aggression, and whether they will do it with power and all that kind of stuff. So they build a lot of power, they build a lot of intensity, they build a lot of froth and crazy and aggression and so on and so forth. And then they try to add the control later. And that's very, very difficult to rein that back in. I think a dog needs to learn how to cap this much, and then this much, and then this much, and so on. If you make him wide open crazy, he's not going to be able to rein that back in. It's very, very difficult. The other thing that is a sort of a very helpful thing is there's a nature example of capping, right? Every predator caps prey because he can't stalk without capping, right? So when a lion or a leopard sneaks up on an antelope, they're not just running like idiots. They're not making noise. They're very stealthy. They're very slow. They're very intent. They don't take their eyes. You see a lot of people try to teach capping by making the dog look at the handler. Doesn't work, right? The lion or the leopard never takes his eye off that antelope, and he keeps getting closer and closer. If the antelope stirs, might be getting ready to run, the leopard will freeze and go, I hope it doesn't see me, right? And then when the antelope relaxes again, it sneaks a little bit closer. So how does that leopard hold still and contain his high desire? Hasn't eaten in a week. His high drive and high desire to pounce on that antelope. He learns it by trial and error. If he pounced too early when he was a youngster, he didn't eat that day. Negative punishment, if you want to use learning psychology terminology, right? He did something wrong, so he missed out on the success. So the animal, the predator, learns to contain and harness their drive until the moment is right to express it. So if we start doing capping drills with young dogs when we first get them, like when I buy dogs from Europe, I typically don't buy dogs that are aggressive, because number one, I don't like how some people try to get to aggression, so they cause all kinds of weird stuff. Number two, I'm going to have to hand that dog to somebody who may have never handled a dog before. And I don't want to give him a dog that is going to bite the neighbor, bite his wife, or the husband if it's a female handler, or you know what I mean? Like, or the handler himself. Like, I don't want to hand something that is already ready to be nasty and violent to somebody who doesn't know how to work a dog like that. So I like buying dogs that are social and have good drive, and then I build the rest. So when I bring the dogs in, I sort of test their basic bite work. I just want to make sure that they love the suit I'm using, because I've had dogs that have never been on anything but a KMPV suit. And then I put a French suit on, not a Dutch French suit, but an actual French ring suit. And they bite into it and they go, what the hell is that? And they just look at it like they made a mistake, like they bit me. They didn't just bite a piece of equipment. They actually bit something that they're not supposed to bite, and they get a little bit startled by it. So we have to build them through that. And I'd rather have them sort of pulling on the leash and being a little bit crazy until I have sort of a basic status quo equipment biter, right? And as soon as I have that, they have to learn capping. So now every bite happens from a contained and harnessed state. If you're not quiet, you don't get a bite. If you don't lay down when we help you, we pat the ground, we do all kinds of, we help. We don't punish them for not downing. We help them out. We try to coax them into doing it. And when they do it, they get a bite. We do it at a distance and we do it closer. And the dogs, like most of the dogs, by the second week, when they come into a room, because I do a lot of the police stuff inside of a building in the beginning, as they come in the room, they see that I have a bite suit on, they lay down on their own, ears up, nails dug in, and they're ready to go. Because containing themselves and harnessing their desire is what gets them the reward, not barking and pulling and acting like little fools. And I think because we started in prey, and at that point, all they want to do is bite the suit.
That in the beginning, perhaps you lose a little bit motivation, but at the end, the dog has understood that going in the down and be silent means he gets that final big reward that he wants, so the motivation will increase eventually through training? Or do I have to upon that situation differently?
Well, if I do, like, if a dog can't quite go in the down, but he kind of crouches into sort of a half sit, half down, I will take that, because the containment is more important to me than the obedience in the beginning.
Yeah.
I sometimes let the dogs pick their own position in the beginning, as long as they kind of freeze and they show me that predatory lock onto me, but holding still and not trying to go for it. That's what I want. That's the beginning of capping. So, and because I work the dogs without any interference, I know what they're sort of, where the bar is for biting. So if they're biting here, I'm good. If they're biting here, I'm not good. So whatever I'm attempting, if there's three attempts in a row, the bites are here, I need to change what I'm doing. I need to approach it different. I need to present it to the dog different. I may have to increase the distance or decrease the distance. I may have the handler help the dog more by maybe physically helping him hold still, so that it's not all on the dog. So some of the responsibility is off of him. But I know what his good bite is. Like, this is his best bite, right? I can accept maybe here, but I will not accept here. You have to set a standard. If the dog is losing too much of his motivation or his intensity, we're not going in the direction of capping. And then when I try to increase the motivation later, I don't have any control. I don't have any containment, because the dog never learned to contain. He learned to comply.
Yeah.
And compliance comes later.
Exercise.
Yeah. So, so here's the other thing. The only thing that the dog that I figure that the dog can learn how to cap naturally is prey drive, which means I need to be very careful that I don't stimulate something other than prey before the bite, because I have no expectation that the dog can cap defense or frustration, right? Because there's no natural example. I can't say, well, in nature, a fox does this and that when he's in defense. Well, it makes no sense for an animal to cap defense, because why would you hold still and be stationary if something scares you, right?
Yeah.
Makes no sense. But what my theory is, that once the dog learns, and I'm going to use a bit of a crass term, is like keeping my shit together gets me what I want in prey. If I add a little extra stimulation, like a little threat or a little frustration or something like that, hopefully he will say, like, this didn't work. Holding my shit together kind of works. I'll try that. And he tries to contain the other emotions as well. And now he's learning to cap those other pieces as well. But if I mix 3 or 4 like forms of stimulation together, I will probably never reach what I want to reach, right? And then there's some dogs that just struggle with it. Go ahead.
So it's different than what they call pre-mac principle, so that a dog has to do something that he doesn't actually like in order to be able to get something that he really likes.
Yeah, but that's the thing is, he shouldn't look at capping as something he doesn't like. He should choose like capping, not because it leads to something better. Capping should be something that he views very positively, not just because of the outcome, because it feels right. Like, predators in the real world don't look upset about having to do this, and they choose it. It's not something like the pre-mac principle is a form of manipulation, which is it's a form of learning. There's no question about it. I just don't know, because I can't ask the dogs whether they perceive capping as unpleasant. Now, I know there are some dogs that cannot cap more than a certain percentage of their drive. They just can't do it. Because of, genetics and like the way we breed dogs. I mean, some of the dogs would just absolutely not survive in the wild. They just wouldn't. They're too reckless. They're too crazy. They run a danger. They do things that would absolutely annihilate them from the gene pool in short order. So there are certainly limitations that we have on that. And I try to select dogs that are have more of a natural tendency to be quiet and cap rather than express. And then we have to sort of do this. So when I do this and I try to really hard to get the dogs to cap as we're building intensity, and capping always stays in the picture because they always have to do control, pre-deployment, during deployment, and then post-deployment. There has to be control, and the only way you can control a dog is if he can control himself, or if you suppress him. But if you suppress him, you lose in power, which means if you need him again, he may not be ready to go. So as we're building, we're trying to continue with capping, and we may reach a point where he can't cap anymore and he starts to get a little bit noisy, right? So then we need to sort of do our best to not make that worse and always try to keep him quiet, And then we reach hopefully an intensity level that allows me to say he now has deployment reliability, meaning that he would now go and whack somebody, right? That's the most important job the dog has, is to save lives by being violent to some bad guy, right? So once we have that and the noise still hasn't gone away, we have to see whether we can knock the dog down. Let's say we have him at 95% and he's absolutely willing to whack somebody. But at 95%, he always gets noisy. Right? And I'm just using numbers so that for illustration, right?
Yeah.
So at 95%, he's reliable to bite somebody, but he also makes noise. So now I can attempt, if the dog allows it, right? And there's some hard dogs where you just cannot suppress them. You just can't. So I'm going to see now if I can suppress him to 90, where he can be quiet. Does he still function? Will he still whack a guy? So if a dog can be suppressed to 90 and still pull the trigger, that's a training option. So he can cap 90. He can't cap over 90. He gets noisy. But I can, with pressure, with techniques, with tools, I can bring the dog down to 90 and he can still function. If the dog can't be quiet until he gets to 85, but then he won't pull the trigger anymore, he's gone from the program.
Yeah.
Then he can make a police dog, because a police dog can be a little bit more noisy, but he can't be a ninja. And you know, for some of the missions that some of the people I train with, they need ninjas. And if we can't make a dog a ninja, then they just don't belong on the team. Yeah. And how we get there, like I said, my ideal way, my perfect way is always capping. Yeah.
Okay.
And then again, we have stuff like, let's say, sometimes you say the dogs need to be quiet. The dogs need to be quiet. Yes. So what's the big deal if the dog barks after I throw a flashbang? Well, it isn't a big deal that the dog barks after you throw a flashbang, because we've already gone loud. So who cares? However, if the dog is barking and you send them, the dog is connecting barking with success. And it'll make our job to make him quiet again that much harder, which means it creates a training scar that just becomes a self-defeating cycle. And that's why I want the dogs to be quiet, even with flashbangs, even with gunfire, even with explosive breaches. They have to be quiet. Otherwise, we have too much to fix afterwards. That's the ideal world. You know, we all dogs make a little noise every once in a while, but we strive for the ninja.
So in this part, you actually are training a bit harder than what you experience in real life, probably.
Well, real life is even harder, because a lot of times, like, number one, in training, we use training bangers and not real bangers. Real bangers are much louder. The nervous vibe of the whole team, like when it's for real, there's a vibe that is just stimulating. Sorry?
Yeah, besides all those things, because you can't replicate that in training.
No.
We already said.
Yeah.
But so if you would just pause that away for a minute and then think about what you're doing in training, it's actually harder. At least in my as you've explained it now, that's how I see it. It would be harder. You would be training harder than what you are going to experience in real life, minus all the other things that are coming into the picture by the team, by the nervousness of the team, etc., etc.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say harder. I think we're deliberately trying to add elements that will sooner or later also appear in the real deployment. So we increase the level of stimulation
Yeah.
to try to get as close to what the dog will probably face in a real deployment. So it's like it can't always be soft. And look, I'm a real scientific dog trainer when it comes to a lot of things, but there's also like there's a duty and a responsibility and a discipline that has to be there, and we have to achieve that, and we have to achieve it without loss of power and without the cost of failure. So
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. All right.
Mhm.
I think because you were pointing to something.
Oh yeah, the
that
part we were talking about leaking, capping, and also about leaking.
Yeah, the when a dog is, but I think Armin has discussed it now,
I think so, yeah.
because of the sound. We had the question, when a dog leaks sound, and he's not actually aware of this. How would you address the issue? And I guess my what I take from what you've just said is that you build it up, so as to stay under the pressure line.
Yeah, except like look, there's leaking, barking is leaking,
Yeah.
creeping is leaking.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
kind of expression of drive that the dog does is a lack of containment, which means it's leaking, right?
Yeah.
The leaking you're talking about is like the whining, whimpering type stuff. That the dog
that's what you meant, but
the dog is maybe doing without self-awareness. You can't really address it. You can't correct it. You can't. The problem with it is the problem with the sort of the involuntary leak, let's call it that, right? Where the dog's not aware. He's just it's just happening. He's not choosing to bark. He's not choosing to move his position. He's just whimpering, like he just can't hold it all in. But is he truly aware that he's doing it? So you see dogs sometimes that all of a sudden act like, oh shit, here comes the hammer, right? And you may have seen that with a dog that you saw last week, right? Because he was corrected for that harshly, right? So what he does is before he even whimpers, he all of a sudden breaks his position and does like a little avoidance circle.
Yeah.
And you probably saw that, right? So why does he do that? Because he doesn't know that that the punishment is for whimpering.
Yeah,
But where does the whimpering happen? So the dog is at 75, he's quiet. He's at 80, he's quiet. He's at 85, he's quiet. He gets to 90, he begins to whimper, but he doesn't know he whimpers. But his drive is approaching 90, and every time he feels his drive rising to 90, he gets punished. So when that feeling of that level of drive starts to build in the dog, he starts to fear the punishment, because he's really not aware of the offense. Now, if he barks or if he breaks position, that's obvious because we can identify that. Like if a dog's always creeping, I've fixed a lot of creepers just by putting them on a bed, like one of those place beds, right? You put them on there. If they move, they leave the bed. They're totally aware of that. So you fix that, and all of a sudden they don't creep anymore. Because every time they creep, they're just told, nah, that's not the way. Get your ass back on the bed, and unless you hold still. So you can make them aware of those mistakes.
Yeah.
If he chooses to bark, you can make him aware of that mistake. The whine and the whimper is something that I'm not 100% sure the dog knows he's doing it, which means we can't really make him aware of it.
No.
And we can't really see whether the dog, let's say he whimpers at 90. Well, I don't know how fast he goes from 70 to 90. So I can't time it when I should tell him to be quiet or something like that. So what you try to do is you try to give the dog sometimes a focal point. If you give the dog something to stare at, and again, we did that with said dog when he was here just a few weeks ago, right? We were doing banger throws and things like that. And if we put like a reward object somewhere, that he knew where it was. So his brain was partially on that. And he was watching the action that would bring him to the point of whimpering, but part of his brain would always kind of divert off to the other. It allowed us to manage that. And at the age that that particular dog is now, his reliability, even if he's a little, like say we're keeping him at 85, that dog will go from 85 to the 90, 95 he needs to be when somebody sends him to the door very, very quickly. So we don't have a deployment worry at that point. The bigger worry is the compromise from the noise. So there is ways to manipulate that with some dogs. It just becomes a scientific experiment, what works. I taught dogs to just stare at the back of an operator's head. They just lay there, and there's always somebody in the room with them, so they just stare at somebody until they're sent, instead of staring at the open door where the bangers are being tossed in, or where the guys are pointing the rifles in, because it's too much for them to look at. It keeps elevating the drive, and it elevates the drive to a level that the dog really can't cap anymore. And then we have leaking. And part of the problem is we may create noise if we, like, you guys can't use the E anymore, but we can hear. But the dog may end up vocalizing because he gets stimmed with an E collar, which compromises just as much as his whining does. So we're sort of in this catch-22. We need to make sure that the dog is quiet, and we can induce noise. So there's limits to what we can do. If the dog just cannot be operationally quiet through whatever we can come up with, he just needs to be canned. He needs to be fired. Look, I consider myself a pretty good dog trainer, but there's some dogs that are just not working out for certain jobs. They just don't. And I've moved dogs from one type of job to another where the noise is not the same compromise. There are SWAT teams that operate, that will never operate without announcement, without noise, without anything. So there's no compromise, right? And the noise, we're talking about minimal noise. We're not talking about a dog that barks like a lunatic where nobody can hear themselves think anymore. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the dog that chirps up every once in a while, little things, little whimpering or little excited yip or something like that, after you've already made 15 announcements and smashed out a bunch of windows. Like, that yip is not going to compromise anything. So the dogs make a perfectly good SWAT team dog for situations like that. But like a dog that needs to do the ninja work, where the dog needs to be absolutely quiet, he may compromise the mission. And we can't always pick and choose. Like, guys will be sent to a mission where noise doesn't matter. And while they're at that mission, they are the mission dog in the rotation. Another call kicks off, and they're sent somewhere where they have to be absolutely ninja quiet. So we just need dogs that can do that kind of work. And if they can't learn that, then we have to just give up on that dog and admit defeat, so to speak. Yeah. So there's things we just cannot fix with training. There's a theoretical concept of capping, but there's only so much a dog can cap, and it changes from dog to dog. And it isn't that the dog that has greater capping problems has more drive. People, my dog has so much drive, he can't cap. I had a black Malinois many years ago that I used as a demonstration dog because I always got handlers. This was right when the narcotics industry was switching from aggressive response to passive response. And all the complainer handlers would always say, my dog has too much drive, he can't learn passive. And I'd pull him out. Does he have more drive than him? And then they got quiet because the dog was a nut. So, but he was a nutty, high drive dog, but he had also a pretty high capability of capping. So I was able to teach him things like that. And I think we need to just accept that certain dogs have limitations, and it's not always like, my dog has more drive than yours, so he can't cap as much. That's not true. There's dogs that are insanely driven that are just, you can't make them noisy. And then there's other dogs that are, good drive, medium drive, good enough to do the work kind of drive, but they can't keep their mouth shut to save their lives. One of the reasons we don't use a lot of German Shepherds, because as a breed, they just are not very well engineered for that kind of work.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine.
Uh-huh.
In talking about the balance between drive and control, what you
Hmm.
were talking about earlier, um, I witnessed an operator working a dog, and
Hmm.
the dog was being, brought in a
Unruly on
scenario with a
lanyard.
lanyard attached to his belt.
Mm-hmm.
And in approaching the suspect, the dog was constantly yanking on that
Hmm.
lanyard.
Yep.
Um, I can imagine that you don't want a dog that walks in a complete obedient way, like in KMPV when approaching the suspect. But I can also imagine you don't want a dog that's taking you off balance.
Yeah. So there's two things with that. Like number one, and I'm pretty sure I know the dog you're talking about. The physical discrepancy between handler and dog is large enough that the handler tolerates that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Pulling on the lanyard does not induce noise with that dog, so he can get away with allowing it. And because he's been able to get away with allowing it, and it physically doesn't bother him because he's strong as an ox, he kind of just lets it go. And he never, we talked about that last time he was here, that he needs to choose a different command. That's always one of the problems. Like, we have a command that means heel, that means walk by my side. It's your responsibility to keep your shoulder by my leg.
Mm-hmm.
It's a positional command.
Yeah.
The command for the lanyard the offense is really just when the dog makes the leash too tight. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
I can either tell him he's about to make the leash too tight, or wait until he makes the leash tight. Now, obviously, if I'm walking with my rifle up, I don't want him to make the leash tight. So I need to remind him every once in a while. But I need to have a word for that.
Yeah.
And if you don't teach a word for that, a lot of times handlers will just say heel. So the dog comes into heel position, and then he slowly creeps out of the heel position until he gets too far, and then he yanks again.
Yeah.
Right? So we teach the dogs a command that means do not pull. And that rule applies whether I have the dog on a 6-foot leash or on a lanyard or anything like that. I put my lanyard, for example, my lanyard is always behind the belt loop. That's basically, the anchor is basically just over my left butt cheek.
Yeah.
And it comes forward. I don't like the dog's back legs to be able to get in front of my left leg, partly because I have really shitty knees, but partly it's also that once he crosses over, it's too much of a tripping hazard. And I like to have the first sort of 6 inches of the leash basically on my butt cheek. So if he gets too far forward, I can tell him the command that I use to make him not pull, and then I just put a little pressure with my butt cheek and I bring him back. The guys that have their lanyard anchor on the front of their hip, they have no leverage. They can't pull the dog back. So they get yanked until the dog realizes I'm yanking my handler, and then the handlers a lot of times reach down and grab him and pull him back a little bit and fix it again. But it's a temporary fix because the dog never really learns what he's supposed to do until he's making a huge mistake. And then the handler is always involved in fixing the mistake for him instead of the dog. That's another thing that people do. They're walking forward. Mm-hmm. The dog makes the leash tight. The handler pulls the dog back, so now the leash is slack, but they never stop moving forward. So the dog is still having success by making forward progress to where he wants to go, and he's not actively doing anything to fix it. So if I'm walking and my dog is getting to the end of the lanyard and I say, slow down, and he doesn't, I will stop until he brings his body physically back to make the leash slack. He makes the leash slack, not me. For him to wait for me to catch up with him, no. That's the lazy way, friend. You're going to come back. I do this from the very get-go. I teach the dogs, and for our English handlers, we use the word walk, basically walk with manners. It means do not pull. We do not allow the dogs to pull into the building on a leash. We do not allow the dogs to pull into the building on a lanyard. If we see that the leash is too tight, we get on the handlers. Do not bring him in here like that. Make the dog slack that leash off. Put it on the dog to slack the line. And the dogs can learn that, but it is 100% dependent on the diligence of the handler. And it's a form of obedience, but it's probably the easiest obedience that a dog can do, because he has several feet of room to move and float around in. He doesn't have to pay a lot of attention. If the leash gets tight, he's supposed to go, oops, I made it tight. Or if I remind him, hey, walk. If I see that the line is getting out a little too far and I don't want him to actually make it tight, I just repeat the word walk, and then they should slack it off. And we do that right from in the beginning. I have a corrective line on his collar, and I have the lanyard on the vest. And if the dog makes the lanyard tight, I use a corrective line to bring him back. Walk, pop, 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 and then make him come back and slack that line off. So it is a form of obedience, but it's people need to understand it has to have a different word than heeling.
Yeah.
And the dog has to understand what the offense is, because a lot of times the dogs have no idea. They're going where you're going. They see a door. Of course, they're excited. So they want to go into the building. Well, we want them to want to go in the building.
Yeah.
What's the offense? I'm pulling. Well, why is pulling an offense? Sometimes we let them pull. We tell them it's okay to pull, right? When they're tracking, or when we're trying to do like on leash, when we're doing frustration building and stuff like that. But we don't tell them to walk with manners. We don't tell them to take it easy. So how do they know that pulling is always bad? It's not always bad. It has to be identified. The leash is too tight, make it slack. That has to have a command. And most people don't teach that. I ask most of the handlers when I see them and the dogs are pulling on the leash, I said, do you have a walking command? Do you have a command that means don't pull on the leash? Well, I just tell them to heel. I said, heeling is a different exercise. And I want to heel. When I come across tight corners, when I go through tight spaces, I want the dogs to be by my side. I want to control where he's at. If I'm bringing my rifle up, I want to make sure that the dog is back so he can't jump up in front of the barrel, right? Yeah. Things like that. I want him heeling. I want him back by my hip. It's easier to shoot that way, and so on and so forth. If I have to move lateral, if he's right beside me, it's a lot easier to do that. But if I'm walking 100 yards before I even get close to a door, he doesn't need to concentrate and heel the whole time. That's just too much mental exercise. So I have a dog on a loose walk, which is, for the English speakers, I use walk. With my own dogs, I use longsome. Yeah. I don't know, was a big bearded guy there for your training as well?
Yeah, but that was not the case. It was not. I think it was not the guy that you're
like a big heavy. He's a heavier guy with a dark hair, almost black hair.
Yeah, but he didn't have a beard.
Okay, there's a different guy. But
I will send you the. I will send you the.
He uses. I use the German word langsam.
Okay.
To my dogs, because I grew up with that. The dogs were pulling on the tracking leash too hard, langsam. So when I don't want the dogs they're walking too fast for me. They're walking faster than I am. That's why they're pulling. So I say langsam. And that handler uses langsam. Is the only Dutch handler that on the team that does it. All the other ones either use walk or they don't say anything. Some of them have, like, they taught the heeling with foot. So they use volgen for the slack walking, but they're not consistent. The consistency isn't always there. The guys that are consistent have a pretty good lanyard walk. But what we do with the dogs a lot of times in school, we do a lot of the lanyard walking when the dogs are done. So when they're walking out, because they're always walking slack then. So the lanyard is sort of a bit of a signal. As long as the lanyard on, nothing's happening anyways. So when we bring a dog into the building on lanyard, he gets to a certain point, there's no action. It's not like I bring him to an open door and I take the lanyard off. I take the dog into a certain point, then the lanyard comes off. Now the action begins. Now I can heel him the rest of the way. Now I can have him tight for the last 20 meters, right? To take him to the door, down him, and then launch him. That works a lot better than to try to unhook that lanyard when he's already looking at an open door and he's going crazy and he's 2 feet in front of me and I have to try to reach to unhook that giant carabiner to get him off of it. It's a mess. So the lanyard should basically mean there's no action. There's no action with the lanyard on. The dog should understand that. And the easiest way to teach that in the beginning is by just when the action is over, you put the lanyard on. So he has the association already a little bit that the expectation is fairly low when the lanyard is on. And hopefully that carries over a little bit. Doesn't always, but hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, Armin, we've already...
Well, we got to do Minke's question because we skipped it last time. So we're going to do it tonight.
Okay.
Which question is this?
The Kong detection.
Enlighten me.
The Kong detection.
Oh, why do you think that's my question?
Because you brought it up last time.
I did actually, but
Yeah.
this
Well,
time,
it came up, and I said that it's not a good way. So
yeah,
let me say this from the start. We have to define detection before we can really break down why I have a problem with the Kong method. Okay, because they call too many things detection, and some of them aren't. Like, for example, cancer cell detection isn't detection.
what kind of, sorry?
Cancer cell.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Okay, that's not detection.
Mm-hmm.
The dogs are not going to the hospital sniffing random people and telling you who has cancer.
Mm-mm.
The dogs are checking 8 cans on a spider wheel, and they're identifying the cancerous cells in one of the containers. It's an identification thing.
Yeah.
The dog's not searching for anything. The dog is going from one can to the other can to the other can to the other can until he smells something that is the target odor. If you want to train a dog with the Kong method that way, not a problem. Any of the identification forms of detection, I think the Kong is fine. I believe even in some narcotics applications, I think it's okay as well. I think for bomb detection, especially in a hostile environment, right, which is what I train a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like bomb detection, like in a soccer stadium, is still a little bit different because a lot of it is done handler guided, very methodical, and very directed. It's a very handler directed and guided search. I think the Kong stuff is kind of okay there. Independent hunting for odor in an environment that is dangerous, too dangerous for the handler to enter into if he can avoid it, the Kong method is not good.
But just enlighten me just quickly before we go on.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is the Kong method? Because for the people that will be listening to this.
Okay, so the dog is taught, and they'll just do it with a Kong. Some people do it with like a little bite tug as well. What they do is they basically teach the dog a basic cap indication with a toy, so that the dog fixates and stares at the toy, which is very good. It helps with indication tremendously. There's no question about that. Once the dog learns that he can earn the Kong by fixating on it, he has a stationary response and he's rewarded with the Kong again. Not a problem, right? We're good so far. Then the dog is supposed to do the same thing, but he cannot see the Kong anymore. So the Kong is now cut into pieces. Yeah. And the pieces are stuck a lot of times in either, depending on how small you cut the pieces, when you start reducing size, it may be cinder blocks or it may be bricks. It's basically the Kong is stuck into a hole, so the dog cannot see it, but he can smell it because he knows what the Kong smells like. He fixates and he's rewarded with a Kong again. Eventually, the dog is given more and more leeway to actually search sort of a brick wall, and he does search the brick wall to find a piece of Kong. The Kong pieces will continuously be cut down in size until it becomes a very small crumb of Kong, until the dog basically can find a crumb of Kong in a brick wall with 1,000 holes in it. Yeah. And the dogs find the Kong and it looks very impressive, and the dogs sit and stare and hold the sit, and then they get rewarded with a Kong. Great. Once the dog does this, the Kong pieces are now hidden in other environments, maybe on a car, and the Kong crumb is stuck into the seam, a crease, some kind of a small crack in the car, or they're working in a building and it's stuck like in a crack of a cabinet, or wooden siding, or any kind of a small crevice you can stick this little piece of Kong into, and the dogs are searching. And when the dogs start doing that, one of the things that I have found, especially when the people start going from the brick wall where the dog can identify the limited search zone, the dogs are usually very independent. And then when they start going into real world things like cars and room interiors and things like that, they start adding a piece. Some people refer to, your friend Jens does, the mechanics of searching, where the dogs are sort of finger guided to start sniffing cracks and crevices and things like that, which is very slow and very methodical looking, right? Yeah. And the dogs are doing that fairly well because they're simply not allowed to just rush past and all that kind of stuff, because people that don't do operational detection have an idea that the dog needs to find something that's the size of a crumb of Kong. Right? If you have a piece of dead cord that way, that's not even going to make a pop. Like, it doesn't hurt anybody. So we need to relax about that. Anyways, once the dog is capable of finding these little itty bitty pieces of Kong or bite tug pieces, whatever people use, they start putting small pieces of explosives, like a small piece of dead cord, a small, a few grams of C4, narcotics, the same thing. It doesn't matter what target odor you use, right? They start putting small quantities of the target odor with a piece of Kong, and then the dog will smell the piece of Kong, also register the detection odor, and show the final response, sit, and then they get tossed to Kong. And once the dog does that, eventually the piece of Kong is removed and the dog searches just for the target odor, except he doesn't search for the target odor because he never learned to search for the target odor. The only thing he learned on the target odor is sitting. His search work was taught 100% for the Kong, which means the dogs show, I see dogs like that all the time. If they find it at all, but most of the time, if I hide like a shit bag would, they don't find most things because the handlers can't help them. So then they're screwed. But if they do find it, it's sort of that they pause and then they sit. And then everybody, they click or they yes, or they throw the toy or whatever method of release they use, doesn't really matter. So the dogs do that. The problem with that is the one thing that I notice compared to the dogs trained the way I train is they don't do a happy dance before they sit. But they do a happy dance when they smell Kong. Right? So if you cut a dog loose in a room and you have a little piece of Kong hidden and the dog finds it, he does a little happy, oh, I found it, and then he sits. But when he finds the piece of dead cord, he doesn't do the happy dance, he just sits. Which makes it extremely difficult to read at a distance when you're doing a route clear. And you need to be able to tell under night vision at 50 to 100 meters whether the dog found somewhere, whether he's just sitting down because he's tired of walking, right? And the dog doesn't hunt for odor. Most of the dogs, the dog you guys just worked with, right? With the redheaded dude, right? When that dog first came, he was finished with the course. He was supposed to be operationally functional. That dog wouldn't leave his handler by more than 15 feet to go into a room to search. And he was, I don't think it was Kong with him. I think it was a bite shoot toy, a jute, like a tug toy that was first. It was the same method. It was the thing. And he just didn't have the search desire. He didn't hunt for the odor because he had done target odor only for quite a while because he had to certify, and the handler had to point him at every nook and cranny. And the dog did certify because if the handler brings him to the odor, the dog knows what to do with the odor. He just doesn't look for it because he never was taught to look for it. Okay. So he ended up adjusting and doing some of the work that I do. And now the dog is a hunting fool, and he's a really, really good bomb dog. And you don't have to go in with him, and you can send that dog into a small house with a camera and he will clear that whole house and find every bomb in it. And that came about because we did a lot of hunting for target odor work. And that's the problem with the method. The dog, like I said, it's a creative method. The other, look, I've worked with too many dogs that are trained that way that miss stuff. When a dog walks by an entire brick of C4 3 times in a row, even though he puts his nose within 2 inches of it, I can see it. It's behind the radiator grill of a vehicle. And the dog is sniffing like he's trying to suck the paint off the car. And he walks past a brick of C4 3 weeks before he's supposed to go to Afghanistan. That's a problem.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And that's because the dog I said, I don't know what he's looking for, but he's not looking for C4. He's looking for a Kong. I had another dog who was actually a female dog, Malinois, really, really good detection dog. Really good detection dog. All right. Except if you brought her into a room and you open the window this far, right? So there was a crack in it and you put a little red Kong there so that a breeze would bring that Kong smell in, you could write that dog off. He wouldn't search any part of the room. The nose would go up, oh, my Kong, and she would go like a lunatic to try to find that Kong. If they got any whiff of a Kong, the other odor was completely out of their mind, right? The other thing that I have, from soldiers that deployed, because of the rubber smell, they start responding to things like radiator hoses, spare tires, any kind of new rubber. If they can't find anything else, they start to get really sort of hung up on that, and they start showing indication and responses there. It's where, look, why can't you do the entire methodology that you're doing, but you're using something that smells like the target odor right from the start?
Yeah.
Why teach the dog hunting for an odor that is never going to be the operational odor? Let me tell you a little story. Right? So I was doing a seminar I'm not going to name the country, doesn't matter. I was doing a seminar, and there was instructors there from the centralized military training school. And after hours, I was doing some environmental weird shit with dogs bite work wise, and we're doing some detection with some of the dogs that were there for me. And these guys had some project dogs with them, and they were doing detection, right? And one of the instructors, nice guy, pretty good trainer, nothing wrong, right? So all of a sudden I hear him swearing like, fuck, what's he doing again, right? So I go, what's the problem? So he's explaining to me that he's been working for 6 months, he said, on this problem. He got the dog, he's a good detection dog, but he indicates contaminant.
Okay.
They'll say, what do you mean by contaminants? Well, something that that isn't the target odor, and that has human odor on it, and blah blah blah. And I would go to the office and take brand new sheets from the printer, and I would crumple up a piece of paper and I'd stick it somewhere, and he smells it and he sits. And he says, well, of course it's my odor, so he recognizes my smell, so he's sitting there. So I started asking some of the other instructors to help me out, and crumple the paper and hide it somewhere. And sure enough, he's sitting on all these contaminants. I said, show me. So he showed me. So he would work in the car. The target odor was on it, and a crumpled piece of paper. And sure enough, the dog comes around, smells the piece of paper, sits, locks on, leash tension, the dog is committed. This is it. I'm sitting here. I said, all right, let's do it again. I get a piece of paper, I crumple it, I hide it somewhere, and we put target odor on it. And he goes and he smells my piece of paper, and he says, nah, that's not it. And he moves on, goes to the target odor. Did I lose you guys? Hello? Hello? Where'd you guys go? Hello?
Are you back?
I'm back. I wasn't gone.
No, we lost internet connection.
Yeah, sorry, we lost the internet.
You didn't like my story, so you hung up on me. That's what happened.
No, we didn't.
Well, I didn't want to say that, but okay.
I don't have your video yet, but I can keep talking. So anyway.
Yeah, hang on. You can have. Wait. I will make sure. Yeah, keep talking. It's good.
Okay. So anyway, the dog smelled my paper, ignored it, went to the target odor, sat, good. So he says, well, that's because he doesn't know your smell because you don't work at the dog school. I said, that's not it. So he gets a little bit of a cocky look on his face. He says, oh, it isn't. You think you know what it is? I said, yeah, I know what it is. Right? Oh, really? What is it? I said, what do you guys train your dogs on? He says, he described the Kong method. I said, all right, what do you reward the dogs with when they sit? Because they're on explosives, right? Well, we reward them with a Kong. I said, every instructor at the dog school rewards their dog with a red Kong, right? I said, I don't have a red Kong. I said, go to the bathroom and wash your fucking hands, and let's do it again. So he did, washed his hands, came back, crumpled a piece of paper up, stuck it in a vehicle, Dog searched, left a piece of paper, went to the target odor set.
Yeah.
I said, you're transferring Kong odor onto the paper, and the Kong odor is his target odor.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a it's a very creative training methodology, I think, and somebody put a lot of thought into it. But again, we get to have these people ever really operationally used a dog to do this. And in that particular country, I can tell you stories how many dogs and handlers came back from overseas saying, I saw a device that my dog walked past.
Oh, yeah.
And those are bad stories. Now, those were just EED dogs, which means they were just, doing cleanup work, which isn't nearly as dangerous as hunting Al-Qaeda, where you're going to compounds where they put things out along the way to blow you up so that you can't get to them.
Yeah.
Right. Once sort of the fighting is settled in an area and you can unleash very slowly and methodically search, it's still dangerous. It's still very, very dangerous. But it's not quite as dicey. And again, accidents happen and stuff like that. But if you see that the dogs are just not excited about the odor they're supposed to find to save their life and yours, that's a gap. And the thing is, you can get them off that. You can add that in there. I just don't understand why not just start with a toy that, like, you can, if you want to use the tiny object method, take a plain white towel, roll it into a little tug, stick it in a box with dead cord, and then do the same drill you do with a Kong, and then cut the towel into pieces if you want to. I mean, I don't do it that way, but I take explosives and put it inside a PVC pipe and put caps on them and let them play with them. Because
I think people get stuck on the red Kong method. People get stuck on the different exercises you can do with that.
It's also very pretty.
Yeah, well,
it's a pretty method. Like the indications that you can't get better indications than that. Except I don't care if the dog sits and turns around and looks at me, as long as he only does it when he finds a bomb.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, I don't know how long it's been since we talked last time. I think about a year.
Close, yeah.
Yeah. So I was talking to Patrick about this. Patrick and I don't see each other and speak to each other that often, but at least not this year, seeing as we've had all kinds of stuff going on. But personally, I've been, I'm in the bedbug hunting business. So I've had a lot of operational work this year. And
opens your eyes, doesn't it?
Sorry, yes, it does. It does. Definitely. Yeah. So it's the way I was understanding this a year ago it's not quite the same as how I'm in it now, because I've experienced a lot of different things with my dogs now, seeing them work, seeing what they need in having to be able to do the work and do it also independently of me, because I have to be able to send my dog into the room without having to present everything that he needs to be searching. Of course, I have in training still presented my dogs with different types of puzzles, such as depth in sheets, for example, or depths in mattresses, or all kinds of different materials where the bed bugs can crawl into, and the depth in that. So I've presented them with that in training also, just to let them get the feel of that. But
and you gotta, like, if I see a dog, for example, like let's say I had explosives in a ceiling, right?
Yeah.
And I see that the dog is registering the odor, but he just cannot find a place to to indicate.
Yeah.
I will go in and I will present, and then with enough time, the dogs will eventually be able to do it on their own. But you need to sometimes, help them. Hey, say maybe if you check here, because I don't exactly always know how the odor comes down either.
No,
so I say, but here's a corner, a crevice, something that might catch odor, and I present that to them. But I only do it after I see odor recognition by the dog, which is, again, a dog that is started on target odor will show you a larger and a more recognizable behavior change, much more than a dog that's trained on a toy that has really nothing to do with the target odor, because the excitement is missing. So I think, like, I did a bomb sweep in the house after a remodel of one of the richest men in the world, who gets real death threats pretty much every day. And he's still alive and nobody blew up. So, like it's nerve-wracking because this is for real. And I think that having a dog that is selfish, and I think that's the big difference between a dog that is that selfishly hunts for the odor that we're actually looking for at the end. Selfish. They basically say, you don't know what you're doing, Mom. It's over here. That's what you want. You want that selfish dog that is willing to argue with you because he's that interested and that driven for that odor. And I think the only way to really create that is by introducing the target odor as a prey item early on. And I think there are some dogs, and I've seen some that do eventually become very good independent searchers, even though they were trained on that other method. But it's rare, and it's sort of accidentally. You can't predict it. Just like, look, we have a very strong culture here in the U.S. of doing passive indication, with the boxes, where the dogs are presented with boxes, right? So the dogs are sticking their nose in a hole, and they smell the odor, and then they tell the dog to sit, and then somebody uses their hand, or they use that little popper, right? And they get a ball coming out of the hole. The problem with that is the dogs are really not rewarded for finding it. They're rewarded for sitting. And those dogs also, I would say about 80% of the dogs require human assistance for the rest of their career. 20 of them start to figure accidentally out. Like they make a prey association, and those dogs become really good independent hunters. But it's not by design. Like the way I train it, my biggest, I think the reason most people don't like the way I train it is because they are not very good at teaching capping. And because I teach the dogs to grab the object that smells like a bomb, and fetch it and play with it and tug with it and all that kind of stuff. Once the dogs do that, people are worried that the dogs will aggress at the bomb odor because they don't know how to teach capping after the fact. Like when you start playing with the Kong, the dogs are biting the Kong all the time, and you guys are all able to teach the dogs to sit and stare at the Kong. So the fact is, but there's no difference. The fact that my dogs are biting into PVC with bombs in them doesn't mean that they can't be taught to cap. It's just that, like, because the dogs are playing with a Kong and biting the Kong, people don't think, well, they're never going to bite explosives because they only bite a Kong. Well, if they get high enough drive, they will. It's if you don't teach the capping correctly, that's really the bottom line of it. And again, Jens and Tobias and those guys, I think that's one thing that they have developed into an art form is how to do that capping for the Kong. That's definitely a very, very evolved craft. It's just from and I like the Kong approach that Tobias does for his tracking, for example, because I think it's very useful because it allows the dog to make a connection. I'm not sure it's always explained correctly, but it's I think it works the way it's done.
You see, it does, but I think if you're emphasizing now the capping part, and I think you've got a point there because I just think you have a point there.
I mean, the final response in passive indication is capping. Because the dog is showing a containment response in order to get what he really wants.
Yeah.
That's capping to a T. And the dogs, you always see the dogs, and if you've been to workshops with other handlers and stuff, you've probably seen dogs that when they find the target, they inch back, like they shuffle back a little bit. Those are the dogs that remove themselves from temptation because they can't cap as well.
Yeah.
The dogs that are really good cappers will be right on it and stare. But the dogs that struggle need to sort of, oh, I'm too close. I can't hold it in anymore, right? So it is definitely a capping exercise. And like I said, when Jens and Tobias work together, I think that they're very, 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 very gifted in the way they manipulate the dog into finding the cap. That's you got to give credit where credit is due. I just, like I said, when it comes to things, is and I said, if you train that way for bed bugs or for cancer cells or any kind of things like that, I don't have a problem. I think when a dog needs to have distance from the handler, so that the handler remains safe while the dog is looking for something very dangerous, the dog needs to have independent hunt, and he cannot develop that with that method. He can't.
No, you definitely have a point. And I think I think the only way for me, at least, to speak for myself was to have to experience it, because that's just it. And that's actually it wraps up quite a bit of what we've been talking about. I think, Patrick, I don't know if you agree, because I see Patrick and I are falling over like, oh, it's like past 12 o'clock this evening, and we need to round this off before we turn into gnomes. But so I think it more or less rounds it off.
I think all the training we do, no matter how much creativity we put into our training and the scenario stuff. Like I saw Patrick, he was here in the US with Ron, and we're doing some stuff, and the throwing all kinds of crap downstairs at dogs and stuff like that. And that's okay, but it's not really real, especially if it really doesn't bother the dogs. And like, you need to teach a dog how to deal with being bothered. You can think, well, that'll bother dogs. Like I've done sort of the barricaded stairs with boxes. I have never seen a dog that was scared of those boxes.
No.
So if it doesn't scare them, then it's really just a lot of work for nothing. Now you can make a dog deal with something scary a lot differently, but you always have to say, what is the purpose of what you're doing? And if that purpose doesn't get you the end function that you need for the real world, then you're not really preparing the dog for the job. And I think, as finessey as the sport people are, everything they do is scripted, and they may be very gifted as trainers, but they never ever have to put to the test their training. Like there's a lot of people, like there's a guy in Denmark that does a lot of tracking seminars. Lars Lentz is his name.
Yeah,
he's very famous, and every world championship he writes about, if a dog gets like really high points, like there's probably a few that get shitty points, but he never owns them. He never tells them that the guy that got 72 was one of mine too. But he always talks about the dogs that got 99. But he even himself says, like, I'm not really a scent work guy. I just teach IPO tracking. Well, he can't teach it. He can't even teach a dog to track on hard surface.
No.
Like he's one of he's one of the biggest tracking gurus in the country, in the world, and he can't teach hard surface tracking. Like, come on, it's because and here's the other thing is, most of them can't even teach dogs to do any kind of angles other than 90 degrees.
Yeah, but I think that makes the circle complete. Is just I guess it's what you have as a goal. I mean, you are very much needed in the part of space we're in teaching working dogs, or working with working dogs to do what they need to be doing in deployment. We don't have to ask you to go and teach IPO tracking.
But I can. The thing is, like, you got to pull
You
it all
probably
together.
can, yes,
I do.
of course.
I've done IPO for almost 50 years. It's just like, for me, if my dog scores 96, 97 on an IPO track, but he will also track through a Walmart parking lot, I will forgo the 100 points every day. It doesn't matter to me. If I teach tracking, I want the dog to really be a tracker. The points matter much less to me. Like, I would rather get 80 points in a Schutzen trial and be able to track any. Like, I took dogs to Africa and I looked at the ground and said, the dogs are supposed to track here. How the hell are we going to do that? Like, there's animal tracks and animal droppings everywhere. It was crazy, but the dogs tracked shit in 3 weeks. We had these dogs doing 10 kilometers in the bush. Like, it was crazy. But the methods have to lead to the end outcome. I've done enough real world stuff to have it tested. Like, that's kind of, to me, always the end goal. Does the skill we're teaching transfer into other applications that basically ask a similar skill? If they do, then you're really teaching a skill. If they do not, if they're limited to the little sport arena that you're in or whatever, then it is very good for competition and stuff like that. But you're not really teaching the skill that the people need that are out there risking their lives and stuff like that. And there's a lot of people teaching in the industry that have no real world experience themselves, or have even, like, we have people in the country that are teaching seminars on real deployment and all that kind of stuff, who have never taken a dog from green and basically just a happy-go-lucky nothing dog that likes to bite equipment to putting people in the hospital alone by themselves, only them. I'm not talking about have they ever worked a dog that has put someone in the hospital. I'm talking about, have you ever built a dog that nobody else touched, nobody else's input, no other decoys, no other help, nobody else's work. You built it from that green little puppy that you got into the street wrecking ball that he became. Did you do that yourself? And how many 100 times have you done it? Because you're teaching other people that what you say gets them there, and you have absolutely no way to make that statement because you have never done it. And that's a problem.
This is a problem, and I totally agree with you. But this is a whole different discussion. We shouldn't get into. Let's please not get into that at this time of.
I appreciate the opportunity to say my piece. I know Patrick asked in one of the questions about how I intend to pass things on. I try to do as much writing as I can. I try to do as many of these podcasts as I can. I do offer my help on some of the discussion groups, and people can reach out to me. I want to do more writing again. We're talking about starting like a YouTube thing about just trying to explain the dog's perspective a little bit, rather than getting too deep into methodology things, but just talking about the way the dog's mind works, because I think there's way too much anthropomorphism going on. I want to share, maybe eventually when I don't do the physical stuff anymore, maybe I will write a book. But it's I want to share knowledge. I'm at an age and a stage in my career where somebody else needs to carry the torch. And I enjoy teaching. That's why I still do the big conferences and that. But it's hard because there's so many people that just have maybe not bigger reputations, but certainly bigger voices, or a lot more experience and savvy with marketing and technology and getting there. Like, we're in a very competitive industry where everybody's trying to trump everybody else. And there's a lot of the younger guys, and not to take anything away from some of them, but they do everything in cliques. Like, they all praise each other, they all support and promote each other's stuff. So you have these little groups. Nobody will ever say anything negative about the other, even when they're messing up. And like, there's strength in numbers, and I'm kind of sort of a lone wolf that's out there, and I'm always the fly in the ointment, because there's always something that, and I do this about my own stuff. It's like, I've written some stuff that I think holds true today, and I would word it maybe slightly different today because I'm better at English now. But it's there's always something that can be improved. It's definitive, like, some of the systems like NAPOPO, like there is no formulated system approach that gets it all done. That just isn't. And that's why, but people market it that way, and people are millionaires with that marketing and things like that. So,
but please don't stay worried about that. Please just.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying it's a very competitive. It's a very competitive thing to try to get the word out, because people, if you disagree with the crowd, you're easy to attack. Have you ever heard about the idea of like why a zebra striped?
Carry on.
No.
Okay, right. The first answer that people usually say is camouflage.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but the thing is, there's black and white animals running around a brown environment. How does that camouflage?
No,
right. So the camouflage that the zebra gets from the stripes is against the herd.
Yeah.
Predators don't hunt 100 zebras. They hunt one zebra, but they can't identify one zebra because the stripes all blend in. So they discovered that when scientists were studying zebras, and they couldn't tell the zebras apart from each other either. So they put like an ear tag in there. They put like a little paint dot on one leg, so they would say, there's the one with the red dot on the leg. That's the one we've been following. They could study those zebras for maybe a day, and then a predator would take them out, because now there was an identifying mark that made that one zebra stand out from the rest of the herd. And the predators were able to identify them as well. And there's a famous psychologist from Canada called Jordan Peterson that actually says that this is a phenomenon in human culture as well, that like in academia, everybody tries to sort of agree with each other. Now in dog training, everybody uses the same terms, and nobody argues, why are you using the term wrong? No. Everybody's on board. We're using them incorrect, but we're all using them the same incorrect way. So nobody argues with each other. And then comes one person that says, you guys are all full of shit. So everybody now has basically a green light to attack that one person that stands out from the herd.
Yeah.
That go along to get along, agreeing with each other, is a form of camouflage to protect you from being singled out and preyed upon. And that's what makes it hard. Like, I've helped people that publicly trash me and ridicule me on podcasts, but they privately call me for advice on the phone.
Yeah.
Because it's easy on podcasts. Because it's easy, because everybody sort of says Armin is an ass, right? And I'm not really an ass. I don't really pick on people. I pick on methods. If somebody's basically advocates training that I think is not good training, I say that's not good training, or that's shitty training if it's shitty, right? Or there's a flaw with that, or there's a better way. I will say things like that. I will just not fluff people just to fluff them. And it makes it easy then to sort of target me. Nobody has ever a problem if people call me names. Like if you call somebody else names, well, that's pretty rude. You're just jealous and all that kind of stuff. But if somebody calls me an ass, nobody cares. And I don't care either, because it's just hard to get the word out, and it's hard to have. If it wasn't for my reputation, my word would be basically squashed. There's lots of people that are squashed. It's just that I've done too many things, and I'm too legitimate for people to really say, like, everybody always says I'm an ass. Nobody ever says my training's shit. Yeah. Or I don't know what I'm talking about. Nobody ever argues about my training, because they can't.
Don't underestimate how many people can see you and really see you. And what I mean by that is see what you are, the meaningfulness you have to the industry. I think there are a lot of people that you don't know about that really do see what you're bringing. So that's what I want to give to you this evening, because I'm sure of it.
Appreciate it.
But please just stay the fly in the int.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I'm a passionate guy. I just turned 60 last week, and I'm as passionate today as I was 30 years ago. This is what I do, and I love doing it. I love sharing knowledge. I love training dogs. And I love, like I said, I think we had a really good conversation tonight. And I don't try to sort of rain on anybody's parade. I have real points and real arguments to make when I say there's problems with this, or there's problems with that, or there's a little faulty thinking. I can also articulate why I say that. I don't just say it because it's not mine, it's wrong.
Yeah, well,
I try to.
as long as we can talk about it, it's good.
Yeah, and I don't mind talking about it, and I don't mind explaining myself. And people can agree or they cannot agree. I've seen a lot, I've done a lot, and I have a reason for saying what I say. If I don't know about it, I usually try to educate myself. Like I'm rereading The Behavior of Organisms by Skinner, to refresh my own mind. And it's like I try to absorb all that. I study as much as I can. And if new methods come up, and there's people that have creative thoughts. Like when I saw what Jens and Tobias do, I can break this down for you. I know exactly how it works. Because I study it. I don't just dismiss it because it's different than mine. If it's better than mine, I'm ditching mine and I'm jumping on that. I need to identify it. I need to understand it. I need to break it down. And I don't mind reading and studying and talking to these people. I know them both personally. We've spoken and worked together. I want to understand. It's the same with Dick Stahl's tracking method. And I actually think that there's a piece that he's missing in his explanation, because it's a very brilliant method. But there's one piece that nobody in America certainly gets, what makes it as good as it is, because he doesn't talk about it. He does it, but he doesn't talk about it. It's a unique method. It's basically exactly the same as Tobias's. It's just that he uses a different value object. That's.
But I'm going to stop you in your track because we are going to fall over. Because I see this partner of mine. Look at his face.
No, I'm good. I'm still good. No, it's the wealth of knowledge once again, Armin. And like I said before, we really value your opinion and your views, and we really value the fact that you're taking the time to explain yourself. You're so full of knowledge, and we're thankful once again for explaining yourself. And and
I don't mind. Look, you can reach out by text like you have in the past and ask questions. I don't mind that either. So, but I appreciate your time. Hopefully, it's a well-received podcast and people like it and get some valuable
we
stuff
will
out
let
of
you
it.
know. It might take a bit of time to get it up and running, because I've had some problems with just putting it into place. And we haven't made a podcast in
couple of months.
So,
but it will be fine. We'll keep you posted.
We will keep you posted. And please, could you do me a favor and write down which recent articles, or the articles actually you've referred to, if you can remember now, in this.
All my articles that I've written are all of them are on the website.
Okay. Well, then we
some are more sport related and some are more law enforcement related, but all the articles that I've written, I think they're all up there.
Should we just refer to them as well, because that would
you can put the website up if people want to look some of that stuff up.
Perfect.
And read it.
We will do that.
Let's do that. Armin, thank you once more. And
you're welcome, and thank you guys.
Hopefully we'll see you again, maybe in another year.
If time wise, I mean, if I do it on a weekend, if you guys are available, like we can do it early in the day. I mean, for me, I said 1800 my time, and that would be midnight your time as a start time.
Yeah, but I think it's winter now, and everyone's
starts
tired.
so early.
Oh my God, we're all like, oh.
I do this monthly Zoom group where it's basically just a little discussion group. I usually pick a topic, and then I talk a bit about the topic, and then we do a lot of Q&A, and then sometimes we get off topic, talk about other stuff. So it's like, obviously I talk a lot, so it gets a little long sometimes, and Tazi tries to put out video recordings of it, and and if you guys are interested in joining that, just go reach out to Tazi. She'll send you a link. But it's it's sort of a discussion group, and we typically do it in the evening because I have to make sure I have enough time after work to get everything done. And we have some people from Europe, the Norway and Poland in places like that. And a lot of times we start 8 p.m. our time.
Okay.
Right. So that's 2 a.m. And people can look at the recordings afterwards, but sometimes you see the guys that just sitting there and it's just start dozing
Almost
off.
falling asleep.
But it is what it is. So.
I actually did a course with Michael Ellis some time ago, and my Zoom classes were at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
So I was sitting there going,
Yeah, because he's 9 hours behind you. So that's even harder. Yeah.
Okay. I know. Well, we really got to go.
Yes.
We're going to fall over.
You guys have
Armin,
a good night.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. Say hi to Tassie from us.
I will. Yeah, she's busy with dogs because I'm sitting down talking to you. So
exactly.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Take care.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye. You have to cut that fucker off. He never stops talking.
No.
So I know what it's like. All right. How do we turn this off?
I'm trying to end the session, but it's not working. Oh my goodness. Stop. All right. Well,
thank you.
We're off. Thanks.
Okay. All right.